All right, let's get a drive time Monday afternoon. We are looking at about 12 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. It is hot, man. I just landed from the great Pacific Northwest, stepped off the plane, and realized that it's very much summer, the dog days of summer here in Salt Lake City, Utah. We are looking at about 96 degrees and sunny on this Monday afternoon, and as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts back behind the mic. Enjoyed a little time off, took Friday off, but good to be back. Shout out to Porter for holding it down and everybody else for holding it down while I was gone. And my goodness, did I miss a lot. I was kind of in the middle of nowhere, Pacific Northwest, without a lot of cell service. And when I kind of got back into reality, saw the news about the transactions in pro basketball. The Utah Jazz have been busy. They're making another transaction as we speak. We'll tell you what that is and what could be next. So a lot of NBA today, a lot of NBA free agent fallout as free agency has begun. Free agency is here. And Austin Ainge is putting his fingerprints on this team as we expected him to do. So the rookies did report. No, Ace Bailey did not refuse to come to Salt Lake. He is here. And Summer League is upon us. So we'll get to know these young men and see what the plan is for Austin and his staff as they move forward with their roster construction. So we'll do some NBA, we'll do some Jazz, we'll do some offseason free agency, some draft. And then the news came down that Jake Retzlaff has been telling his coaches and teammates that he is transferring. And the civil lawsuit that was filed against him has been dropped. That came down earlier today. Kyle Bonagura, friend of the show, Pete Thamel, and, of course, our friends over at the Salt Lake Tribune, Kevin Reynolds, making sure they're taking care of that story, doing a great job. And it's just, it's really too bad in a lot of different ways. I will reiterate what Sean had to say during our crosstalk portion. This is not a situation where I find it appropriate to dunk on anybody. I think it's a bad look. I just think it sucks. I think it sucks for everybody involved. There just isn't any winners here at the end of the day. So we'll talk about it on the program. It's one of my most unfavored things to cover as a media member in state honor code violations at BYU. Like, what do you do with that? Everybody knows the deal, man. Everybody knows the deal. And if you're not willing to kind of toe the line down there, you probably should look to find a different place to go to school, as I've always said. But busy show. RSL. We'll get to a little RSL on the program today. They're going to be back in action with actually kind of a busy schedule moving forward because the June slate was so light. They only had 2 games in June. And they're starting to get healthier. We'll see what happens when they get Diego back, and hopefully Emeka Nelly gets back soon as well. So we'll do a little soccer on the program, do a little RSL on the program. Of course, one eye always on the offseason of both the NFL and pro football, but it's kind of a quiet time for that right now. RSL was able to get a draw at Children's Mercy Park over the weekend, 1-1. And now they're going to take on St. Louis. They've got actually 5 of the next 6 games at home. Wait a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the next 9 games at home. Oh, all right. So a lot of RSL here in the market as they're going to be home for most of their matches over the next couple of months. All right. Good guest list today on a Monday. Happy Monday to you. Hope you had a great weekend, off to a great start to that work week. We'll bring in Tim Bontemps right off the top. Timmy covers the NBA for ESPN. He's on the Hoop Collective podcast. We'll get his thoughts on the Colin Sexton transaction. Yusuf Nurkic, and you had to attach a second to Colin to make the trade. Kind of caught me off guard a little bit. The Jazz are working on a buyout that actually just became official, so Jordan Clarkson is now a free agent. The rumors are out there that he will sign with the New York Knicks, who, by the way, do not have a coach. So Jazz making moves, Austin Ainge making moves. The NBA Finals and the NBA Draft is behind us. So we'll do a little primer today with Timmy Bontemps. Tom Haberstroh, consistent Monday guest of ours. Tom wrote a really cool piece, well, I should say a really insightful piece, on this weird Malik Beasley situation where he's the subject of a federal gambling investigation. Malik played a little ball here just for a little bit before he was moved off of, and had a really good year, actually, in Detroit. But another weird story based off of players being caught maybe doing some inappropriate things as far as fixing lines and such to make a little money. So we'll see what Tom has to say about that. We'll bring in Amy Donaldson. It's been a while since we've been able to catch up with Amy, our friend from KSL. We'll bounce around a little bit with Amy, do a bunch of different things. Kurt Schmidt, RSL roster constructor, technical director. I lose track of the names over there, but Kurt is the guy in charge making the decisions. We'll talk about the draw against SKC, and then we'll look at St. Louis, and we'll see how healthy the group is getting as RSL badly in need of points. They do have 4 points over the past 2 games, which is a good sign in the right direction. So we'll bring Kurt in today as well. So Tim Bontemps, Tom Haberstroh, Amy Donaldson, Kurt Schmidt, me, Spence Checketts, back by on the mic. Great to be back. Thanks for giving Porter your attention. And speaking of Porter, how was Friday? I heard you had a little adventure.
Oh, yeah, we were just a tad bit out of the neighborhood down in Spanish Fork, but it was a good time. And as you mentioned, we had plenty to get to, all of the Jazz draft stuff, all of the trade talk gathering on Friday. And, of course, at that point, the Ace Bailey stuff was, I thought the entire time, much of a non-story. But that was kind of the part of the show, was trying to explain that to a lot of the listeners who were concerned. As you know, during the show Friday, all that kind of got cleared up, and that was the basis of it. But a good time down in Spanish Fork with our friends at Tim Daly.
Very nice, very nice. So our first guest today will be Tim Bontemps. But before Tim stops by, courtesy of our good friends and your good friends too at Prize Picks, it's time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
So as I referenced, I left town and a lot happened over the weekend. Busy weekend of local sports storylines. We'll get to the Jake Retzlaff BYU stuff a little bit later on. Have some thoughts on that. What's next for BYU? What's next for Jake? As this whole situation probably is something that everybody involved is ready to move on from. But the Utah Jazz, led by Austin Ainge, are making some moves. So it's pretty clear, as we discussed last week prior to the NBA draft, Austin Ainge has not had a hand in this roster construction up until he took the job, obviously. So he is not married to any of these players. There's probably just no loyalty. I don't mean that to sound harsh. It's just like all of these players are going to be on the table. And if we're honest, most of them have been on the table. Colin Sexton, certainly a name that a lot of people have been watching for potentially to get moved. Well, he's on his way to Charlotte in exchange for Yusuf Nurkic. And then the Jazz actually had to attach a second-round pick to Colin to make that move, which caught me off guard. I mean, Colin Sexton is a good basketball player. There's a lot to like about Colin. He played pretty well here. I mean, he was a 19-point night guy. Ended up shooting over 40% from three last year, which was a career high. The usage stuff isn't great, and he's one of these guards on this roster that isn't a great defensive player and doesn't have great size. So I wasn't too surprised to see Colin and hear the news that Colin had been moved on from. I just completely thought they'd be able to get more than Yusuf Nurkic, who is a shell of his former self, and he was never really that good anyway. But he is a backup big, and maybe, he and Walker Kessler practicing together, a veteran center that can help Walker out. But also, Nurkic is more expensive than Colin as far as his salary goes. Not by a lot, but the Jazz actually took back more money than they sent out with Colin Sexton, and they had to attach a second-round pick. Now, the main motivation here is actually really simple. We don't really have to overthink it. It is pretty clear, at least from my understanding, some things that I've read and some discussions I've had, the Jazz really like, and by the way, it's Walt Clayton Jr., not Walter. He told us at his introductory press conference he prefers Walt. I think this kid's going to play. And I think one of the reasons they made this deal, in fact, I would say the main impetus for the decision-making process was to open up minutes for Walt. And they're going to play Isaiah. I mean, Isaiah started a number of games last year. Keontae got a lot of minutes off the bench, even with Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson, who, by the way, is also no longer a member of the Jazz. The Jazz have reached a buyout agreement with Jordan. So today, no Colin Sexton, no Jordan Clarkson. And essentially, as far as the value and return, yeah, I think they probably could have done better for Colin, but if they could have, they would have. It's not like they were looking for a bad deal. Ultimately, this just opens up minutes for the young guards. More minutes for Isaiah, more minutes for Keontae, and more minutes for Walt, probably. And just opening up opportunities for these young players to play. Because remember, if we take Austin at his word during his introductory press conference, when his response to Sean's question about manipulating minutes and losing on purpose, you will not see that this year. Okay, so really what they're doing is they are going to play these young players almost exclusively. In a way, it's what Washington did for a while last year. they brought in some vets. They've got Chris Middleton. They've got Marcus Smart. Now they have C.J. McCollum. But last year, it was a lot of Bilal Coulibaly. It was a lot of really young Washington players because they were playing for draft capital just like the Jazz. But unlike the Jazz, Washington didn't go about it in a way where they were manipulating minutes and making up injuries and sitting players that were healthy. That the Jazz did that. You can ask them. The league fined them. So I just think when you look at how this is going to go, you are going to see a lot of Walt Clayton Jr. You're going to see a lot of Isaiah Collier and Keontae George and Bryce Sensabaugh and Cody Williams, and hopefully Taylor's healthy, and obviously Ace. We'll get to Ace in a minute. So those are the two transactions that the Jazz have made that are official. Colin Sexton is a Charlotte Hornet. Jordan Clarkson has been bought out. They draft Ace Bailey. They draft Walt Clayton Jr. And I just think you're going to see a lot of young kids play, man. I just think that's the deal. It's going to be a lot of youth. It's going to wear on Will Hardy. Coaches don't like playing rookies. They don't like playing young players because you cannot trust them. And it will look really rough next year in a lot of different ways. And that's probably by design. And I'm certain they're looking at next year's draft and hoping that maybe they can get a little luck next year that they didn't get this year. And then potentially, if that goes down, if you can get one overall and say it's the DeBonsa kid who's going to play at BYU, then we got something, right? Then we've got something as far as how this thing is going to go. All right, before we catch a break, the Ace Bailey stuff was interesting because I got to be careful here because I'm sure I was part of the problem. I mean, I wasn't reporting anything. I was just reading and listening to reactions across the board. And I've heard a lot of people just crack on ESPN for this specifically. It wasn't just ESPN. There was an athletic report. There were several people on social media that surmised that Ace very much did not want to come and play basketball in Salt Lake for the Utah Jazz. Personally, can't corroborate any of it. We did talk about it on Thursday before I left town. But much ado about nothing. I'm not sure that I would go that far because, remember, we don't know really what goes on behind the scenes. And the most recent example I can use is the Donovan Mitchell situation where our guy just blew up that roster. He blew up that iteration of Jazz basketball because of the way he conducted himself behind the scenes. And him deciding whether it was whatever, the Senator Adams, can't remember if he was a senator, but one of our state legislators with some very tone-deaf, unfortunate comments that when I heard him make, I was like, oh, dude, just don't say that out loud. You can keep your opinions to yourself if you want to. But that iteration of Jazz basketball was blown up by one person. This was not Danny Ainge rolling in here and deciding to break it down. This was not Justin Zanuck deciding that team was done. This was Donovan Mitchell essentially telling people, I am out of here as soon as I have the ability to make the decision. Quinn Snyder himself saying no pathway forward. So, I've heard a lot of mostly team-employed people talk about, the Trey thing, there's nothing. There might be something there. But what's this kid going to do, not show up and report? I mean, obviously he's going to show up and report and sign his contract and be a part of Summer League. I don't know if he wants to be here or if he doesn't want to be here. I think the story was reported maybe in some circles a little inappropriately. But fact of the matter is, in this league, as Richard Smith talked about and Gordy talked about during draft night when we did our draft coverage, if you want to work for the business of the National Basketball Association, they assign you to an office for the first 7 years of your career. And we can debate, and I have debated in the past, whether or not that's right, whether or not that's just. I've always said if you're among the best at what you do in the world, you should have a say in where you do that thing. But in the ecosystem of pro basketball, it takes you 7 years to earn that right. And honestly, it's not all that different. I mean, how many people right out of school or whatever for the first job land exactly where they want to be, doing exactly what they want to do for the people they want to do it for? That's not how life works. So say what you want. I mean, the Jazz are going to have a 7-year runway unless something goes bizarrely sideways to convince Ace that he can accomplish whatever he wants to accomplish here in Salt Lake. So he reports all the noise seems to have kind of gone away. And now we get Summer League, and we'll see how he looks. The Jazz have released their Summer League roster. We'll tell you who that is, or I should say we'll tell you who is on that list. They also released Johnny Juzang today. That's not that big of a surprise. So the Austin Ainge era as the primary voice and decision-maker for the roster construction of the Utah Jazz has begun. We will catch a break, and we'll do more of this with Tim Bontemps. Tom Haberstroh stops by. So does Amy Donaldson and Kurt Schmidt. Busy Monday show, and it's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. So it did just become official. The Jazz have reached a buyout agreement with Jordan Clarkson, who will now become a free agent, according to our very own Sarah Todd, friend of the show. She's hearing that the New York Knicks might be the landing spot for Jordan, so we'll get back to that. Of course, a lot to do with our first guest right out of the gates. One of our favorites, Tim Bontemps from ESPN. Tim, happy Monday, man. How you doing?
Doing well, Spence. How are you?
I'm well. Appreciate the time. So let's just start with that. Jordan Clarkson, who by all accounts has been great here as a vet that this organization has really embraced and really enjoyed having here. Probably had his best year under Quinn Snyder when he won Sixth Man of the Year a number of years ago. And, Tim, you and I have talked about this. If we're honest, he's been available for probably 3 years, but no market for him as he's hit the buyout market. And like I said, Sarah Todd is reporting the New York Knicks might be the landing spot. What are your thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go back to Austin Ainge's intro presser, and he talked about, we're not going to intentionally manipulate lineups. Well, you don't have to intentionally manipulate lineups if you remove the veteran players and allow the young players to play through mistakes. And I think that is what the Jazz are pretty clearly doing. I mean, they moved on from Colin Sexton the other day. They moved on now from Clarkson. I assume at some point similar thing could easily happen with John Collins. And, I think we're going to see a lot of these young fellas playing this season for Utah. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Let Walter Clayton play through mistakes. Let Keontae George go out there and do stuff, and, let these guys, Isaiah Collier, et cetera, let them all grow and develop and play and get better. And, at the same time, it's probably going to accomplish the other goal the team is likely going to have, which is to not have a very good win-loss record and have one more crack at a high pick. So, makes sense. Makes sense for Jordan to have a chance to go beyond a contending team. We'll see if it's the Knicks or somebody else. And I think it sort of makes sense across the board for everybody.
I agree. Let's move over to the Sexton stuff. Another player, Tim, that certainly could have been traded at any point over the past probably, 3 years. I was a little surprised they had to attach a set. Like, Colin's a good player. I mean, this is not an all-star, but he played well here, about 19 points a night, shot over 40% from three. The decision-making at times can get suspect. He's not a great defensive player. But they have to attach a second rounder to him to send him to Charlotte in order to bring in Yusuf Nurkic. That I think that's just an expiring deal. I don't know what else as far as the motivation goes. But give me your thoughts on that transaction.
Yeah, I think it was the exact same thing. I mean, the Jazz have a bunch of guards, and they want to play them. And, moving on from Clarkson and Sexton allows them to do that easily without any issues. And, yeah, look, I really wouldn't be too concerned about the 1 second. I think if you look at, where the Jazz sit, it was obvious why they'd be looking to move on from Sexton, and I'm sure the Hornets saw that and said, hey, if we're going to do it, why don't you give us a second? But I don't, I can understand why people go, why do they have to go a pick? I get that, but, I'm sure Charlotte looked at the situation and saw what was going on too. And, the truth is, there's not that many places you can necessarily send Colin Sexton. I think if there was value in the market for him, they certainly would have gotten it. So I think, again, overall, you move him out of the way, you move Clarkson out of the way, you play Collier and George and obviously especially Walter Clayton Jr. and you roll forward. And I think it accomplished the goal that the Jazz had for what they were trying to do, and I think you saw more of the same today.
So Ace Bailey is the pick, Tim. The Jazz made that pick at 5, and I think a lot of people around here are really excited for the potential. Jonathan Gavoni and Sam Vecini, a lot of the mock draft guys about 5-6 months ago actually had Ace in the mix for like number 2 outside of Cooper Flagg. And it's like, where's he going to go? Of course, his teammate Dylan Harper separates himself. He's the 2nd overall pick. But I want to know what your understanding is about the story that was surrounding Ace after the Jazz drafted him, where it was reported that his agent refused to give a comment. I think it was to you guys over at ESPN about whether or not they're excited to have Ace in Salt Lake City. And, Tim, you've been coming on the show for 6 years. You know the deal. We want you to like us so badly. Sometimes it's a little ridiculous. But, there was even some people that surmised he might not even report. Well, that wasn't the case. He flew in on time. He gave his presser and seems like a really sweet kid who's excited to be here. Do I know exactly what's happening behind the scenes? No, I have no frame of reference for that. But I wonder what your understanding is of that entire dynamic.
Yeah, here's what I would say. I would say that, what ultimately matters is the last part, right? And as Jonathan and I were reporting on that story last week, my belief the entire time was that if we got to the point where Ace Bailey got to Salt Lake City and was around Will Hardy and Austin Ainge and Ryan Smith and, with the rest of the Jazz organization and with Walter Clayton also, who I thought was a very good pickup by the Jazz in the draft, I thought all this stuff would eventually sort of ebb away, and I think it will in time. Obviously during the draft process, it was quite clear that Ace's camp had a pretty clear idea of what they were trying to do, which I think the general consensus was to get to Washington, and they did not get to Washington. And, like I said, I think that led to a little bit of interesting circumstances for a couple days, but like your read on Ace is what I think anyone's read on him that's been around him, is that he's just sort of a, pretty gregarious and friendly guy. And I think he's the kind of personality that I think fans will really like as a player. And, look, he's obviously a guy who's a big swing and a toolbox of a player. And I would argue that he probably landed in the single best spot he could land in, where there'll be no real pressure on him. It's sort of, obviously, Salt Lake City is not, playing for the Knicks. And he'll be out of the way, and he's playing for a great coach in Will Hardy, who will put him in the best positions he can to succeed. And, I think ultimately the long-term situation for him is going to be a really positive one. And whatever his potential is as a player, I feel pretty confident that, whatever he's going to be in the NBA, he'll come as close as he's going to be to hitting it, playing for Will and playing for the Jazz.
That last part I wanted to follow up on. You kind of answered the question, but let's unpack it a little bit away from the drama and just hone in on the player. As you've learned more about him, I don't love comps, but if you have some comps out there, like what should the fan base know about his potential, and should he develop and stay healthy and all the things fall into place? What do you think that looks like in the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to stay a little bit away from comps just because I've seen him play a couple times in person, but I'm not Jonathan Givony from a draft standpoint.
Sure,
but what I will say is, like, you don't need comps to look at him and see what the potential is, right? Which is to be a big, rangy wing. The guy he measures closest to is Jason Tatum. Like, obviously, if he turns into Jason Tatum, the Jazz will be very happy, right? Whether it's him or Paul George, like name the big scoring wing that can, handle the ball and shoot it and make tough shots. Like, that's obviously a hugely valuable and highly coveted player. And, there's obviously a lot of swing and miss potential on that. Like, we've seen a lot of guys like him get drafted that are a project and the project doesn't work out right. But like I said, I think when you look at where the Jazz are sitting, they're sitting with the 5th pick. They fall down in the draft. They fall out of the top 3 or 4 like they'd hoped to be all season. And as you said correctly, all year long, Ace was a consensus top 3 guy. For him to fall from 3 to 5, and for the Jazz to get a guy that, when the lottery happened, if they'd gotten the 3rd pick in the draft, it would have been widely assumed they'd take Ace Bailey. I think that's a win for the Jazz, and I think it was the other thing I'll say is I think Austin Ainge deserves a lot of credit, and the Jazz front office and scouting group deserves a lot of credit, because nobody had any idea of what the Jazz were going to do going into the first round last week, and I think that they deserve a lot of credit for keeping their stuff quiet, not having anybody know what's going on, and they deserve credit for taking a swing on a guy that didn't work out and, wasn't exactly clear how it was going to play out. And they bet on their process and bet on the talent. And now we'll see if the talent works out in the end.
Just ask you one more follow-up Jazz question before we move on, because as you have articulated, and I am on board with, and I agree with, it does appear they're clearing the deck, and this is going to be a team that leans into their youth, and there's going to be a lot of young players playing a lot of big minutes, and I'm sure Will Hardy is going to be a little frustrated from time to time. Coaches don't love rookies and young players. But they still have a John Collins on the roster. They still have a Lauri Markkanen on the roster. I don't know that I've ever been in the whole like they should trade Markkanen camp and just reset the clock, because he really is very good when he's right. And he actually has, teammates that know how to play pro basketball. But they're due. I'm not doing the Windhorse what's going on Utah thing, Tim, but I'm doing something like it. Do you think there are other moves on the horizon for this team?
I mean, certainly I think that John Collins, I don't know this to be sure. This is just me looking at it, but I would say John Collins following Jordan Clarkson and Colin Sexton out the door as another vet, to get out of the way of some younger guys playing could make sense. Now, the Jazz have a lot more guards and perimeter players than they do bigs for that category at this point, so maybe John Collins sticks around, and I certainly don't think they're going to be in a rush to get rid of Lauri Markkanen just to do so. So I think if there is a Lauri Markkanen trade, I'd imagine it's going to be for him getting quite a bit of value back. In general, like you said, I think the vision for this is very clear. And I had a lot of people ask me the same question you had about the Sex trade. Why, surprised they gave up a second rounder. But again, I think that's sort of a negligible cost, and the overall direction here is very clear. And frankly, I think it's been very clear from the moment Austin got asked about, tanking and what the plan was going forward, right? The second he said that, a lot of people latched onto we're not going to do that, as we're not going to tank, which I don't think the Jazz are going to tank, but what they are going to do is what you said, which is lean into their young players and allow them to play through mistakes, and that's probably going to lead to a healthy amount of losses, but it's also going to, I think, create a more fun, I would say, atmosphere for fans to be watching the games, because instead of, sort of what has gone on the last year or two down the stretch, a couple of years before, and then most of last season, it's just going to be the young guys playing, and then you'll let the chips fall where they may as the season plays out.
Actually, I have one more Jazz thing. I want to get your thoughts on this. They did end up trading 3 second-round picks and essentially swapping their first-round pick just to move up 3 spots to take Walt. And by the way, it's Walt. He told us all during his press conference he wants to be called Walt, so we will call him what he prefers. And look, that's probably a little too much to move up just 3 spots. But the other thing is, like, if he's the guy, right? Like, if you've identified that that's your guy, go get him. You know what I mean? So your thoughts on attaching 3 second-round picks and that first just to move up 3 spots to take Walt Clayton Jr.?
Yeah, I mean, they used the 3 seconds to get up and get Clayton. And look, we'll see if seconds become more valuable as talent comes back in the draft in the coming years. But seconds probably matter as little as they ever have, with the way the second round has been turned into a two-way factory. So I don't mind the cost of that. Again, if Clayton becomes their long-term starting point guard, which I think he very well could, I'm a very big Clayton fan.
For sure.
Then the cost of that is negligible. Now, moving up is always a risk, and paying that cost is always a risk, because if it blows up in your face, it's a double whammy, because you don't like to miss on a pick, and you don't like to pay the cost of having to move up to do that for somebody it doesn't work out. But I like the fit. I think, especially for a young team, having a guy who has played as much as he has and has the leadership qualities that he does, I think will be a great thing for the Jazz. It would not shock me if he quickly becomes the long-term starting point guard for Utah, and I suspect he's going to be a guy Jazz fans are happy to watch for a long time.
All right, Tim. So typically when everybody has the same take, I'm a little bit skeptical as if that's the right take to have. But it's been a few days now since the draft. And look, maybe Derek Queen is Jokic Jr. Maybe he's awesome. Maybe he turns into a great player for the Pelicans. I just don't understand how you can't even attach like a top 4 or a top 5 protection to what they sent to Atlanta to move up 10 spots. And Maybe I'm missing something, but this is one of these things where it just feels like everybody has the same opinion, and that opinion might be right. Like, what do you think the mindset is for Joe Dumars and the Pelicans with the deal they made on draft night?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's opinion is correct. I mean, it's pretty hard to justify that trade. The value proposition just is not there for New Orleans. It's a remarkable deal for Atlanta, which has had a remarkable week. I mean, Kristaps Porzingis was a very good pickup for them. Loved the work they did in the draft. It seems like they got a decent chance to get Nickeil Alexander-Walker from the Wolves. If they could do that and sign him this week, that would be a pretty massive pickup. And, I mean, look, Derek Queen could become a great player. He's obviously a very talented guy. He can do a lot of different stuff with the ball. But the value proposition there of moving up 10 spots and giving up an unprotected first, and one that, if you ask people in the league, is projected to be a top half of the lottery pick. I mean, that pick's got a good chance of being a ping pong ball pick next year, meaning one that's in the top four. That's just way too steep a price to give up. And, I mean, like you said, you just sort of asked about the Jazz giving up 3 seconds to move up 3 spots, right? Not a completely unprotected first-round pick and a very good draft next year with, in a situation where the Hawks even stayed in the first round. I mean, it's hard to fathom on every level.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. All right, so a lot has been made, and maybe we just need to always lean into any story that is attached to LeBron James. He opts in, and then there are conversations about, Rich Paul makes some comments that he wants to compete for a championship. Maybe they do move off of him. I have no idea. But what's your take on just the entire LeBron dynamic opting in, then the noise that's kind of surrounded that over the past few hours?
I suspect LeBron James will be playing with Luka Doncic with the Lakers in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really see another way this is going to go. If LeBron had really wanted to explore the studio space, he could have easily opted out of his deal. He did not. It's very hard to trade anybody making $53 million, even if you're motivated to. There's really no reason for the Lakers to be motivated to. Because LeBron has no trade clause, they couldn't trade him really if they want to without his consent on both the location and the trade coming back. That makes it extremely difficult to trade him. Again, if there's a world where the Lakers wanted to trade him, I'm sure there is not. And so I suspect the Lakers are thrilled he opted in, or thrilled to have one of the best 15 or so players on the planet still on their team, and will be excited to have him and Luka play together in the fall.
I would agree with that. It feels like the noise around Giannis is quieted. Is that fair, or do you think there's still something there?
I think it's in the same place it's been, which is let's see where the Bucks are at after free agency, and then we can maybe assess what the overall situation is. But Giannis hasn't asked out. There has been no change in that situation, and they got Bobby Portis signed. We'll see what else they do, and I think when the dust settles, we'll see where the Bucks are at, and then we'll see if Giannis decides to change his tune at all. But for now, yeah, I mean, he's expected to be there, and they got Portis done, and we'll see what else they could do in the coming hours and days to fill out the roster around him and see how competitive they could be in the East.
Why do you think there's been this increase in player movement? I mean, it's the first day of free agency, and I think there have been over 20 transactions. Is that a CBA deal? Is that a second apron deal? What gives with all this? It seems like, Tim, there's just a lot more movement earlier than typically there is.
Well, there's basically no movement that's happened so far. What's happened is, I mean, I guess there's a couple trades that have happened, but I mean, predominantly what's happened is now the second that the finals are over, you can officially begin negotiating with your players who you have under contract. So for the last week, what we've seen is a whole flood of deals for guys that are staying with their current teams, right? And so it used to be this stuff would happen, and then you'd get to 6 o'clock tonight, and free agency would start, and then the floodgates would open, and you just would announce all these deals, right, that were done. Well, now, like when you get James Harden signed, you could just say, hey, we got James Harden done. And, you can sort of go down the list that way and just, get all this business done. So that's why it's felt like there's more public stuff, because there's not a, flood that's coming out at 6 o'clock tonight. And a lot of this stuff that was already sort of done in this period in the past is now being done and taken care of before we get to 6 o'clock on June 30th. And that's when, we'll start to see the guys that were changing teams. We'll start to see what happens with them starting tonight in terms of where they go and what their situations look like.
Anything else coming out of Boston, or do you think mission accomplished with Holiday and Porzingis off the books?
I think they got their mission accomplished in terms of getting out of the second apron. It wouldn't shock me if the Celtics get out of the tax if they can. They're like $15 million in. We'll see what happens with Holiday and with Jaylen Brown and Derek White. I don't think they're trading either of those guys unless they get a ton for them. They would have to be a crazy deal to do it. We'll see what happens with Lou Cornett and Al Horford, two of the most popular players in the free agent market this summer, and two guys that I would not be surprised if they're playing elsewhere next season, as things have shifted pretty dramatically in Boston since Jason Tatum got hurt.
Last thing, Tim, I'll set you loose, because I do, like, in a sneaky way like this for the Cavs, if Lonzo can stay healthy, as I'm knocking on wood, because we know that for the past few years that's been difficult. But he got back last year, 35, 40 games, and, looked pretty good. I think Isaac Okoro is a decent player as well. But what'd you make of the Cavs-Bulls trade?
I loved it for the Cavs. I mean, another trade where the Bulls give up a better player for a worse one and don't get draft picks. They've done it several times now the last couple of years. It's pretty remarkable. But for the Cavs, to get Lonzo, obviously it's worth the swing for them. Isaac Okoro cannot play in the playoffs. We have learned that very definitively. Lonzo can if he's able to stay healthy. And as far as the other part of it too, it essentially became Ty Jerome and Isaac Okoro swapped out for Sam Merrill, who stayed there, and Lonzo. And I think that trade is a good one for the Cavs. Those two guys are both solid defenders. They both can shoot the ball. They both can play on and off the ball. I like the fit going forward. So I think that worked out for Cleveland, and it's right as of right now. You're looking at the Cavs and the Knicks, and then a whole lot of questions in the East.
Tim, you're the man. Appreciate the time and the knowledge on a Monday. Excuse me. Have a great week, bud. We'll get you back on soon.
Sounds good, Spence. Thanks, man.
All right. Timmy Bontemps covers the NBA for ESPN. Does a really good job. Always enjoy when he can stop by. We will keep you up to date because the news is coming in fast and furious. If you're just hopping in your car and driving around town on this Monday afternoon, first of all, hello, how are you? Thank you for making us part of your day. The Jazz have completed a buyout with Jordan Clarkson, and our very own Sarah Todd, who's a friend of the show, is reporting that the New York Knicks are the potential option there. There's a report that the Knicks are looking to sign Russell Westbrook. If the Knicks sign Russell Westbrook and Jordan Clarkson, that would just be hilarious. The Jazz also traded Colin Sexton to Charlotte for Yusuf Nurkic. They had to attach a second-round pick to Colin. Talked about it earlier. It just feels like they're clearing the deck for the young kids to play. I'm not sure that there's anything other than that. We'll catch a break. Tom Habershow's our guest coming up on the other side. We'll get to the Jake Retzlaff situation at Brigham Young. Amy Donaldson will join us. A little RSL later with Kurt Schmidt. So we got a busy Monday show, and it's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. Buyout has become official. Jordan Clarkson is a free agent. Sarah Todd, friend of the show, is reporting she's hearing the New York Knicks could be the landing spot for Jordan Clarkson. First day of free agency, man, and the news is coming fast and furious. Our next guest will help break it down for us, the great Tom Haberstroh, on a Monday. Tom, happy Monday, buddy. How we doing?
Doing great, man. How are you?
I'm well. We'll start with the Jazz stuff, and then we'll kind of move on from there. And let's just start with what I just referenced. Jordan Clarkson, buyout. He is now a free agent. And look, man, you and I have been talking about this for years. This was a candidate to be traded, quite frankly, every trade deadline over the past 3 years, but obviously no market for him. He's coming off 2 straight years where his production has dipped. He's not as young as he once was, and neither are any of us. But what do you make of the Jazz buying out Jordan Clarkson, and do you think the Knicks are a logical destination?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the market, a guy like DeAndre Ayton, a former number 1 overall pick, just worked out a buyout with the Portland Trailblazers in similar fashion, where it seems like by the box score, this player on a trade market would have value. And Jordan Clarkson, has been a serviceable spark plug for the Utah Jazz. But as Shams Charania pointed out on social media in the report, is he wants to join a contender. Obviously, the Knicks are a contender in the Eastern Conference, especially with the decimation of the top of the East with Tyrese Halliburton, Damian Lillard, of course, and Jason Tatum all having Achilles tears, that a team like the Knicks could hold a lot of appeal, especially because a lot of their half-court offense really needed an injection last year. When it got bogged down or Jalen Brunson was in some sort of foul trouble and needed to be taken out of the game, they were relying on Deuce McBride, who's fine, but he's not the kind of dynamic scorer that Jordan Clarkson can be on and off the ball. So they get another guy in that if that ever were to partner up. But the Utah Jazz are in a real state of transition here. Is John Collins, Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton last year. We had been talking like if the Jazz could find some sort of draft capital and move off of those expiring contracts, I think they would entice those deals. But as you're seeing with the Colin Sexton move, not only did they not have a market for him in a trade straight up, but they had to put in a second-round pick, a 2030, in order to get off of Colin Sexton and bring in Yusuf Nurkic. So Jordan Clarkson is feeling the same kind of crunch that DeAndre Ayton had, is that a lot of these veteran deals, it's hard to move off of those and take on, long-term money. I think the Utah Jazz are trying to keep their books pretty clean going forward, and you're seeing this deal that they'd rather waive Jordan Clarkson rather than, say, taking on another contract beyond this season. And so this plus the Juzang waiver and then the Colin Sexton trade, it's clear that, they were trying to figure out deals, and ultimately they landed on Yusuf Nurkic with the Charlotte Hornets, a guy who is playing for the Blazers and then the Suns and then the Hornets, and they're trying to just kind of rearrange this depth chart and figure out if they can, basically clear out some room for Mr. Ace Bailey coming in next season.
All right, you referenced the Sexton stuff, and we'll move over to Ace in a moment. And to your point, and I was a little surprised, Tom, because, look, Colin Sexton isn't Allen Iverson, but he's not a bad player. He played pretty well here. This is a guy that's averaged 20-plus in the NBA at a prior stop in Cleveland. He shot over 40% from 3, about 19 points a night, plays his tail off. I mean, that's kind of his MO. Now, doesn't guard. Neither do many of the guards on the Jazz roster. They're not great defensive players, not great size. But to have to attach a second and receive Yusuf Nurkic in return, who just doesn't have the value that he once did, and it doesn't make a lot of sense here. Your point about the expiring money is definitely on point for sure, and that's probably the motivation. And then ultimately we land in a spot where they're clearing more minutes for their young guards. But what did you make of that transaction between the Jazz and the Hornets?
Yeah, it's just clearing out the lane for Ace Bailey. I think you get 3 guys in Juzang, especially Sexton and Clarkson, is they need the ball in their hands to succeed. And I think when you look at the addition of Ace Bailey and Clayton Jr., you're going to be wanting those guys to have the ball without any sort of confusion about their role. And I think Clarkson and Colin Sexton were both probably looking at this like, hey, I'm not here for the rebuild another year of this, and you got these young kids coming in. Can you find us a home? And I think Jordan Clarkson, the market was pretty tepid for his services on the trade market, but I think you'll have a much better time in a winning environment in New York on the timetable that he wants at his age. And Yusuf Nurkic has really had a drop-off considering, a few years ago he was part of that team that went to the Western Conference Finals. He was injured, but this team was, just a few years ago, he was averaging almost 20 points a game, 20 and 10 for the Blazers. Now, he's not the same player. He's now 30 years old. When you're looking at projecting a 7-footer with his skill set, you're not going to be expecting much of a starter here. This is a backup role. And it's essentially just balancing that depth chart again to make sure they get a little bit more depth at the center position and clear out the way for Walter Clayton Jr. and, of course, Ace Bailey up at the guard position.
We'll stick with the Jazz, and you just referenced the two players, and they also drafted the Tanji kid in the second round, who actually can score a little bit. We'll see if he sticks around. But, this is a tough one because I have experience living elsewhere, growing up elsewhere, and so I understand when people say, well, Salt Lake is not this or that or whatever, but I've lived here for 25 years, and just this whole shtick, this whole bit that this is like the worst place you could possibly exist as a young athlete gets so tiresome to me. And to be honest, I don't know what's real. I've been doing this long enough, been around this league long enough that I always know there's the messaging from a player or an agent or a coach or a front office, and then there's actually what's really going on behind the scenes. I get all that. But there were some people, Tommy, that were going as far as to say they didn't think Ace was even going to report. He didn't want to be here. And there was a report that his agent was asked to give a statement to ESPN, and he refused. I can't corroborate any of these things, but I'm reading, preparing for the show and all this. Well, he reported on time. He could not have handled the presser better. He seems like a really sweet kid who, by all accounts, is excited for this. Am I saying that's real? No, because I don't know. But what's your understanding of this narrative surrounding Ace and his camp? Like, they just did not want for him to be here in Utah playing for the Jazz.
Yeah, I think it's really about the camp and not necessarily about Ace Bailey. I look at the fact that he had a lack of a certified agent for much of this process, and Omar Cooper that was guiding him in this process. And I think this is what you get what you pay for, in the sense that there's a lot of confusion and misinformation and misreporting, and someone says this and someone says that, and you can't get your head on straight. And this is why you hire an agent that has credibility with the teams, that has rapport with the teams. And then you have one voice that is talking to not just the organization, but also to the media to get the story straight. And so I think this is what was a real misstep by Ace Bailey, and he's 19 years old, so he's a kid. If we all had to make decisions about this at 19 years old, I'm not so sure we'd be as confident as we are in saying, as adults, looking back at him and being like, oh, I would have done things so much better and so much more mature than Ace Bailey. He's 19. And I think this is why you hire an agent with a lot of credibility and a lot of tenure with NBA front offices, so that you don't have to deal with this fog of information and dealing with, this report says this, that he's not reported, he doesn't want to report to Utah, et cetera, et cetera. I think he didn't handle the pre-draft process as nimbly or as smartly as he should have, but I do think that once he gets to Utah and he's not this, kind of free agent, so to speak, I think a lot of that will go away, and that you have this organization with, real, reputable, successful front office and coaching staff, that I think a lot of this will go away and wash away. Ace Bailey is a big swing. If things move right, if things go in the direction where he reaches his ceiling and he fulfills his potential, this is an absolute home run swing, a number 5 pick that people think could be Tracy McGrady. I think he's more DeMar DeRozan, where athlete, loves the mid-range, and is a super young kid that has a lot of upside. That is a Hall of Famer, a future Hall of Famer type. He's got to clean up a lot of the off-court stuff that followed him in this draft, but ultimately when you see the press conference and you see the skill set, you can understand why the Utah Jazz are really excited about him, and I think he's in really good hands in Utah.
The other decision they made in the first round, and, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, I don't really have an issue. Like, if you have identified, it's Walt, by the way. It's Walt Clayton Jr. He told us in his introductory press conference he wants to be called Walt, so I will call him Walt. Like, if you're Austin, and by the way, Brad Stevens had a funny line. He said, I could have told you 2 years ago Austin was going to trade up to draft Walt Clayton Jr. So Austin has always liked this kid for sure. And look, if you've identified a player as someone that you think can be your starting lead guard for maybe a decade or more, go get him, right? I have no issue with that. They did have to attach 3 second-round picks and give 21 to Washington just to move up 3 spots to get Walter Clayton Jr., but there was some intel that was leaked that Miami wanted him at 20. They went with the Yakachonis kid from Illinois. But what did you make of the decision-making process by the Jazz to go up and get their guy, Walt Clayton Jr.?
Yeah, what's interesting is players that win championship, the NCAA championship, win the tournament, are actually slightly undervalued in the draft. For a while there, the Shabazz Napiers of the world, we kind of thought that those guys on a big run in the tournament were actually overvalued. But recently, we've seen a lot of these players actually exceed expectations at the next level. And so a guy like Walt Clayton, he is really talented and also is a winner, and an All-American last year at Florida. I got a chance to watch him when the Jordan Classic came to Charlotte, and he was great. You could see that he had an NBA future and certainly played himself into a first-round pick this season with the Utah Jazz, who are a team that is really searching for their point guard of the future, and he's going to be in the running with Isaiah Collier and Keontae George. I thought there was some potential that maybe you could see the Utah Jazz trade up to get Dylan Harper as their lead guard of the future. But, I mean, Walt Clayton, he's legit. He's really good. And if you watch Florida this postseason, this kid can play. He's a flat-out baller, and he draws a lot of comparisons to Jalen Brunson for good reason. He's got great footwork, and he wants the ball in crunch time. And so I can't hate on this pick, especially considering a lot of the players that you would think would be late first-rounders actually moved out of the draft and stayed in college. And so if you like a guy like Walter Clayton and you want to pay 3 second-round picks to go get him, I'm cool with that, especially when you show what Joe Dumars did in the draft to trade basically 2 first-round picks. They had the swap ability of theirs and Milwaukee's, and they traded Atlanta, the future first-round pick next year from New Orleans or Milwaukee to move up 10 spots. I'm fine with what Utah did.
All right, so, I often say if everybody has the same opinion of something, I tend to be a little skeptical. I just think I've always been cynical that way, and I like to zig when people zag. But maybe Derek Queen's awesome. I don't know. Maybe he's a Hall of Famer. Maybe he's an All-Star. What are they thinking, Tom?
Man.
Help me understand. Is there any zigging to this zag? Is there any justification for the move they made?
No, I can't. I mean, unless Derek Queen is the second coming of, Karl Malone or Kevin Garnett, I can't understand. Here's the problem with that logic. If you think he is that guy, then you take him at 7, right? Like, if you think Derek Queen is that guy, you make sure I'm going to take him at 7 for sure. Bird in the hand. If I really think he's that good, I don't even have to give up the next year first round pick to go get that guy. So it's just baffling, especially in sequence of the fact that they traded for Jordan Poole And that dude has not been a winner in his own situation as a lead guy. And so, I mean, what is New Orleans thinking is the right question. I don't know. I mean, you look at Kyrie Irving, how he became a Cleveland Cavalier. It's because the Clippers and Neil O'Shea did not have the foresight to think, oh, man, we should put some protections on this first-round pick. We'll give up an unprotected first-round pick to acquire Mo Williams from Cleveland, and you can have this salary dump and Baron Davis. It's fine. How bad could this get? And it turns out that Cleveland jumped up with that Clippers pick, and it landed at number 1, and that's how the Cleveland Cavaliers ended up with Kyrie Irving, who hit one of the biggest shots in franchise history, if not the biggest shot in franchise history, to win them a championship. You look at Jason Tatum and how the Boston Celtics drafted Jason Tatum. Well, it was because of a pick swap. They were able to get the number 1 overall pick through Brooklyn in that KG Paul Pierce deal. They got a pick swap, and they didn't get it protected from Brooklyn didn't protect that pick. It ended up going number 1. And they traded down to number 3 with the Philadelphia 76ers, who also were drafting at number 3 because of an unprotected pick swap. They moved from 5 to 3 as a result of a trade where Nick Stauskas was being traded by Vlade Divac. He just got the job with Vivek Ranadive with the Sacramento Kings, and they got off of some money, and they're like, oh, yeah, we're desperate to get off of this money. We'll give you a 2017 pick swap, unprotected. How bad could it be? And it turns out it ended up being the number 3 pick, and that ended up being Jason Tatum. So these pick swaps, these have huge value, especially when you look at Giannis Antetokounmpo and his trade limbo. He could not be on the Milwaukee Bucks next year. And when you see the injuries that happen in today's NBA, these unprotected picks are super valuable. And Joe Dumars and that front office, they decided to give up a super first, one that could be swapped out if the New Orleans pick is later than the Milwaukee pick. They can swap and make sure that they get the Milwaukee pick in the case that Milwaukee bottoms out next season. It's baffling to me. If you wanted Derek Queen or in love with Derek Queen, then take him at number 7. You know, trading next year's first-round pick, unprotected swap, is baffling to me. And the other thing I want to say here is, you know, Troy Weaver, the former Detroit Pistons GM that got fired and then spent last year with the Wizards, it seems like he has a thing for the D.C. area guys. Of course, he trades for Jordan Poole, who was on the Wizards last year. And secondly, his son, Troy Weaver's son, was the Maryland Terrapins grad assistant for Derek Queen. Derek Queen was a star for the Maryland Terrapins last year. And the word is that Troy Weaver was in on every practice with the Maryland Terrapins and was at most of their games last year in the D.C. area, and now trades up to go get his guy. It seems like this is getting a little ridiculous, the fascination with Wizards or Wizards-adjacent players, especially when they won 18 games last season. I'm not sure what they're doing in New Orleans, but it's certainly something that other teams are going to be calling New Orleans to try to pilfer all of their assets that they have going forward.
All right, what's next, Tom? What's the domino? What's the next transaction that we're all waiting to hear that you think is actually real? Is there some Giannis stuff out there still? What do you think's next?
Well, the Giannis thing is interesting because the Kevin Durant sweepstakes ended up with the Houston Rockets retaining all of their high assets. Like they still have Amen Thompson. They still have Reed Shepherd. They have Jabari Smith locked in long term. They have their Phoenix first round picks. And so I suspect that we're going to hear a lot more about the Giannis situation in the next week or so because he hasn't come out either way. Giannis hasn't said, I'm sticking here for the long term. I like what I'm seeing from the Milwaukee Bucks this offseason. I'm here for the long haul. I want to retire a Milwaukee Buck. He has not said that. He also hasn't asked for a trade. And San Antonio picks Dylan Harper, and you don't see them moving out of that pick because I think they want to keep it in case Giannis Antetokounmpo hops onto the market and they can move Dylan Harper potentially in a trade for Giannis. I don't think it's likely that Giannis becomes available this offseason, but I do think that the biggest headline is that DeAndre Ayton, Jake Fisher is reporting at the sideline that he just gave up $10 million in a buyout with the Blazers, which sets him up to make about $10 million and not losing a penny off his next deal. So let's say the Lakers, with their mid-level exception that is up to $14 million, they go, hey, DeAndre Ayton, we would like to have you as a Los Angeles Laker, and we'll give you $10 million of our taxpayer mid-level, our non-taxpayer mid-level. DeAndre Ayton could become a Laker. Maybe Brook Lopez wants the full $14 million, and DeAndre Ayton, former number 1 overall pick, can become a Laker. That's the next thing that I'm looking forward to, is what happens with the Lakers and that vacancy at the center position. Because, of course, Jackson Hayes lost so much clout with J.J. Redick that they went basically small for the entire series against the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm interested to see what they do there, especially now that LeBron James has opted in and kind of delayed this Luka Doncic era one more season. Very interesting stuff coming out of the Lakerland.
All right, Tom, last thing, I'll set you loose. I know you wrote on this. So Malik Beasley was a Jazz man for a minute. Didn't last that long. And you know what? We talked about this when the Jonte Porter stuff came out, and I know that you have done some digging, and these two investigations aren't necessarily the same, so we'll unpack it a little bit. I'm honestly surprised this isn't happening more with how easy this is and accessible it is to gamble on sports, but Malik Beasley is being investigated. Allegations of gambling related to NBA games and prop bets. Okay, so that's kind of out there. You've done some digging.
Yep.
Unpack this for us before I set you loose.
Yeah, TomTheFinder.com if you want to read more, but I'll give you what I've found so far and kind of tease, as the story progresses. But Malik Beasley is being investigated, and according to ESPN.com's David Purdom, there's one game in particular that has drawn the attention of the sports betting community. Is January 31st in the Damian Lillard return game. This was in 2024 when he was with the Milwaukee Bucks. There was a lot of unusual betting activity around his rebounding unders, the player props, meaning he was supposed to be, the line was at 2.5 rebounds, and there was a lot of betting action on the under, meaning that he wouldn't reach 2.5 rebounds. He would have 0, 1, or 2. And what's interesting about that game is that he had 6 rebounds. And so it's a real wrench in this whole story, is that there's suspicious betting activity or unusual betting activity around a game where the bet would actually lose. The other thing that's really interesting here, and I watched the film and there wasn't really anything suspicious about that game from what I could tell. But what's interesting is I think this is a big story, and you said I'm surprised it's not happening more often. And I'm with you. Malik Beasley, you might say, hey, this guy makes $6 million a year. Why would we, potentially throwing his career away over a couple bets? Well, one, these are allegations. They're not pressing charges. 2, Malik Beasley was taking a 90% pay cut in that season. He went from a $16 million contract to a $2 million contract. I don't care who you are. A 90% pay cut, no matter any walk of life or standard of living, is going to be really hard to stomach. And I think that is a big story here, is that Jonte Porter was a fringe NBA player, and this guy was making multi-millions in the NBA. And still, I think there's a potential for financial vulnerability if you have guys losing 90% of their income in 1 year. And so Malik Beasley was making $16 million the previous season, and in this season that's being under scrutiny, he only was making $2 million. And that was one of the biggest pay cuts league-wide. And I think the NBA needs to keep a close eye on these potentially financially vulnerable players that would have an incentive to make ends meet if they are maintaining their standard of living and the budget and the houses and the cars and all the other expenses that come with the $16 million annual salary. It's a really interesting story, and because of free agency, it's getting buried here. But make no mistake about it, this is a huge, huge story, and we'll see what happens with the investigation. No charges have been pressed yet, but we'll see in the coming weeks here on the Malik Beasley story.
TomTheFinder.com. Tom, thanks for the time, buddy. Keep up the great work, and we'll chat soon.
You got it, Spence.
All right. The great Tom Haberstroh, weekly guest of ours to talk all things NBA. Yeah, Malik Beasley's in a little hot water here. So it's a federal investigation As Tom referenced, this was when he was with the Bucks, so not when he was here with the Jazz. But this could Jonte Porter, I believe he was banned for life from the NBA. So if anything comes down, we will bring that to you. We will catch a break. Amy Donaldson will join us coming up on the other side. Kurt Schmidt later on for a little RSL. Busy Monday show. We got about 2 hours left. So don't go anywhere. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. Adam Sandler is coming to the Delta Center on October 26th, 2025. That's this year. Tickets are on sale now. Text Farley to 33986 for your chance to win. Porter, would you mind efforting the Sandman?
Yeah, I'll get him. I'll get him on the show.
Maybe in studio?
We'll try.
Okay. Yeah, just effort him. Adam Sandler's not in studio, but an old friend is in studio. We haven't seen her for a while. Amy Donaldson from KSL. How are you, Amy?
I'm good. I've probably seen every Adam Sandler movie, not because I'm a fan, but because I had stepsons.
Sure. Yes. Yes, indeed. There's like a generational gap between Sandler. Like people my age think he's funny, and I feel like the younger people just are kind of out on him because he's made so many bad movies.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's a bad stretch.
I think there might be a little bit also of a gender gap for Mr. Sandler.
Mm-hmm.
Although his recent affection for Taylor Swift, because he has daughters, has brought him, I think, into the fold a bit. So
Okay.
there are some women now who are giving some movies a chance.
Okay. That didn't age very well, I guess, back in the day type stuff.
Well, I don't think they've seen Waterboy.
Waterboy wasn't one of his best.
What was the one where he was where he wasn't? He had to go back to like elementary school or something.
Billy Madison. Billy Madison was great.
That was the one that my stepsons loved.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. So what have you been? Let's get an update. We were just talking off air. You've been traveling. I follow your Instagram. You're all over the place these days.
I have, and haven't been very dedicated. I retweet and share what some other people
all
are
good.
doing. But I went to Australia for a month and hung out with my kid. Moved there last year, and so I went there. And the first 2 weeks, Ed was with me, so we had to go. He's a huge snorkeler, beach guy.
Ed is?
Yeah.
Nice.
And he loves. I mean, he considered like actually diving, but we didn't have a ton of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, which sounds funny because we were there a month, or I was there a month. He was only there 2 weeks, but so we did snorkel on the Great Barrier Reef and go out to some islands, and I just love learning. I mean, just especially like the mangroves, like the nature is just so fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
And a beach entirely made of fish poop. It's the most amazing, beautiful place you've ever been.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's super cool. So, but yes, we did that, and then he's a huge Mad Max fan. This will not.
Oh, cool.
You.
Okay.
So
nice.
Mad Max 2 was filmed in a place called Broken Hill, Australia, and everybody knows who knows Mad Max knows that is an Australian film in origin.
Mm-hmm.
So we went out to the museum out there, and everyone thought we were crazy because it's in the middle of nowhere, but it looked. I'll tell you this: it was like going to Delta, Utah.
Really?
It looked so familiar. I loved it so much.
Interesting.
It's a super cool town. A lot of Aboriginal people live out there. A lot of old miners. I mean, miners are my family, Park City roots. So, yeah, it was super fun, and the museum was amazing. And then we went back to I had a pretty vicious case of food poisoning just as we arrived in Broken Hill. So we went back to our hotel room and watched Mad Max 2.
Do you know what you ate?
Yes, I do.
What was it?
It was a spicy chicken wrap from the airport.
Oh, that shouldn't do it. Spicy chicken should be safe. Well, I guess it is
airport
airport
food. Just say that
food.
I have not eaten chicken since.
Okay.
And I'm not so sure I can eat a wrap.
You're going to take a little bit of a break. And then you were assisting your sister, who is a ultra marathon runner, try to get through a race in Alaska.
Yeah, she was running the Denali 135, and I agreed to be a pacer. I said I could maybe give you 50 miles, but she got pretty sick about 50 miles in, made it about 15 more miles, and then after about the halfway point, we called it. We more so called it. I would say my mom and my dad and I collaborated to convince her, because I don't know if you know an ultra runner, but they're not. They don't want to quit. They'll die before
I've got a couple of buddies. Like whenever they're telling me I'm like, what are you doing yourself?
I mean, I'm not a good ultra runner because I will quit.
Yeah.
I'm not. I want to hike another day.
You want to live.
I mean, and I guess for me, the experience, like walking through interior Alaska with my sister in the middle, and it's not dark. Like it never gets pitch black in the summer, right? So it's like 11, 12 at night, and it looks kind of like dusk, and it's just the most beautiful place. For me, that was so awe-inspiring. I was like, this is the thing.
Well, it's cool.
It's not the finish line. I mean, she was trying to go for. That would have been her second finish. It made her the first woman to ever finish it twice. So she was pretty bummed. And if I know my sister, she'll be signing up for that race again because she's not really good about quitting. But congratulations to my sister.
Indeed.
I have to give her congratulations. She was just promoted to lieutenant
Very cool.
She teaches at the public safety in South Carolina.
Okay.
The state.
Good for her.
For the state, so.
All right, Amy, I was excited to see you on the rundown because a couple of things going on that I want to get your perspective on. And, we were talking, I had Tim Bontemps, on earlier from ESPN. And the way the Ace Bailey story was covered, and I want to be clear, I don't know what's true and I don't know what's not. I mean, you and I have done this long enough where that you get messaging from players, you get messaging from agents, you get messaging from coaches in front off, and then there's what's really going on behind the scenes that they don't want to say out loud.
Sure.
So there could be several levels here. And I'm one, like you, that grew up elsewhere but has made Salt Lake an adopted home. And it's basically been my home for 25 years. I don't think that's changing anytime soon, but I guess you never know. And I can get a little defensive when I hear people talk about our market, certainly juxtaposed with places like Cleveland or Oklahoma City or San Antonio. Like, I just prefer Salt Lake over a lot of the NBA markets that I've been to over the course of my life, and maybe I'm biased here. So the whole thing comes out like, oh, wait, it's not his preferred destination. And there were even people who said out loud he's not going to report. He doesn't want to be there. He refused to work out for any team. There was a report that he actually told, not Ace, I want to be clear, this is his reps, told one team in the top 5, do not draft him. He's not reporting. It obviously wasn't the Jazz because he showed up on time. He did a great job with his press conference, had his introductory dinner, and he seems like a sweet kid who's excited to be here, right?
Yeah,
So what's your take on this entire dynamic?
Well, I think it's a collision of everybody wants to have a scoop and everybody hates us. It's our insecurities coupled with this 24-hour news cycle where everybody wants to know something special. Everybody wants to give you something that you can't get anywhere else. I had the scoop. I mean, I see it a little bit. Well, we see it on all these bigger stories, right? A little bit on the Retzlaff thing in the last.
We'll get there.
The last 24 hours.
Yeah, we'll get there.
But yeah, so I think we're competitive people. I'm talking about journalists, and we want the inside story. We want something. When you're going to these press conferences and everybody's getting the same, pablum, we want something different. And so you're trying to talk to different people, get different things. And I will say this. Nowhere in my journalism career has there been more irresponsible speculation than in sports journalism.
Interesting.
There are people I once traced. There was some rumors going around on a story, and I started to call the people who were reporting them and say, and I know everybody. I said I'm not reporting. I want to know. I'm trying to figure out the roots of this thing, like where this information came from, right? And what ended up happening was it was a circle. So somebody was quoting somebody else, but if you traced it around, they were quoting each other. It's like if you and I told each other the rumor that we heard and we confirmed it for each other, and then we both go out and say, it's been confirmed by a source.
Oh, interesting.
So we are each other's source.
Yeah,
we don't know anything.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. So once that happened, I think it was around 2012 that happened. So very early in my sports career, especially once I started getting out of high school sports, when you're talking about Olympic sports or college sports, definitely in the pro ranks, people want, that's your bread and butter. Being the guy or the girl with information is how you make your name. And some people are reliable about that, and they're very careful about that, and they check and second check. And some people say things out of turn, But yeah, my experience, because I come from a news background, is if you don't know, I'm not going to quote you, even if you tell me something really solid. I know some really solid things I've never reported because I don't have a source on them. And I believe the people, but I don't have a firsthand source on it. So I think it was, and then I think there's this natural, and I think it's somewhat become a narrative in professional sports, especially the NBA. A little bit in college. It happened with AJ when he committed to BYU, right?
Yep.
Why would anyone want to go there? It's Utah.
Right.
What have they done? Who are they? Why do you want to be there? They're an also-ran. They exist, but they exist for us to beat them on the way to something else.
Yep.
It's like they call flyover states the center of the country. We are a flyover place in sports. And so there is this narrative, and we are all super defensive about it, including our reporters here. And then these things all collide. Everybody's looking for information. Somebody repeats a rumor. Somebody says it. Everybody's scrambling. I heard this. You got a boss. I've had this happen to me. You get a call from your boss at 10 o'clock on a Friday. Somebody else is reporting this. What do you know? I don't know anything. And then saying I don't know as a reporter is like the worst thing ever, but it's the truth sometimes, because sometimes there's not anything to know. And I don't know if an agent or somebody was trying to stir up some interest, or like, again, how these things happen, we don't know. I wasn't doing initial reporting. I heard these rumors coming out, and I saw journalists saying another person who doesn't want to come to Utah, this guy will be gone in 4 years, all these things. And I assume they don't know anything because they're not in these rooms having these conversations. I thought, I'm just going to wait. I've learned and see what happens with the kid. And couldn't have been nicer. Showed up, did his thing. It happens every time. But I think it's just the collision of two really bad, sort of the insecurity coupled with this idea that, like, everybody's got to have a scoop,
Yeah.
I know something you don't know.
Right.
Right.
I wonder because, again, without knowing exactly what's real and what's not, I will say that I like that Austin just took him. Like, all right, maybe you don't want to be here, but we think you're the guy, and this is the best player available at 5. Because I do feel like there's been this undercurrent of fear tied into certain decision-making, and I actually wondered, and again, if we operate off the assumption, which is never a smart thing to do, but there was so much noise around Utah not being Ace's preferred destination and so much reporting over the 24-hour news cycle that I'm inclined to believe there's something there. I don't think it's with Ace. I do think it's with this agent of his who isn't even like he doesn't have his right. Oh, he didn't have the paperwork filed to be like an actual agent when Ace first hired him. So he's new at this, and he's probably trying to figure it out. So if there's even a sliver of truth to it, the Jazz had that intel. But I like that Austin just said, we're drafting him. We think he's the best player.
But I also think Austin is savvy enough, and everybody else at the Jazz, that if it were true, if it felt true to them, they're going to have conversations about that before they draft him. They're not. This has happened before, where there's been a trade rumored, or there's been an acquisition floated, right? And there's been open resistance to coming here. Those are conversations you have to have, because the last thing you want to do is is use your pick on somebody who's going to then blow up your whatever your plan is, right? That didn't happen. So if you say it was like some sliver of truth, some rumor got blown up into something else, or somebody said something offhand and somebody ran with it, whatever happened, whatever the rumor mill was doing, and whoever was doing it, I firmly believe, or at least I have this much faith in Austin Ainge, and that is that he had some conversations with people about whether or not, or how much of that was true, or it may have been as simple as this, that someone said, you're probably going to go to Utah, or it looks like you might be going to Utah, and he's like, Utah, I don't know where the heck that place is. I wanted to go to X.
Right.
And he's 18, right? I could totally see that happening.
For sure.
And then that begats all these other things he's not going to do. He didn't work out for anybody. They're looking for, and this is where our brains work. We look for evidence that we're right. This is why we have the politics we have. You don't hear all the information. You hear your whatever bias you have, that whatever confirms that for you.
Echo chambers, yes.
And so I think that's somewhat, but it's happened so often. I believe, and I watched the press conferences. I 100% believe that if there was a whiff of this before, there were conversations that were had, so that even if there was reluctance, it was understood what that reluctance was about. So whatever was going on, if it was nothing, I heard somebody say it was nothing or whatever. How many times have we been the purveyors of an offhand comment? I've been there when something like that's been said and people run with it, and I think, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah,
that was a joke, or or that was just a reaction. And again, the way things are now, this kid is 18.
Right.
Like, you have a kid, I have a kid. I hope nobody's holding my kid to what she says.
For sure.
Sometimes I have a reaction like, what? There are so many things in a meeting or wherever where you're like, your initial reaction is, that's stupid. I don't want that, whatever. But like, give people room to get educated and to get information and to maybe evolve. But I was super impressed with the press conference. I liked all the picks. I thought it was really fun. I have tickets to the summer league with my grandson and nephew, so we're gonna go. And my nephew, who's a airman at Hill Air Force Base, has been in a depressive state since the lottery. Texted me immediately, all caps, and is beside himself with joy. So
good.
However it works out, we're gonna enjoy it.
Well, and the only time will tell. I when it comes to What I feel is really unfair messaging about the Jazz and Utah and Salt Lake. It just makes it hard for those guys to do their jobs when they've got to answer all these questions, misconceptions. Like, no, it's not that weird here. And again, you and I both grew up elsewhere. I'm aware of the oddities that exist here. I've never ran from them. They are real, okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't make it a horrible place to live. You just have to find out how you traverse the space and, respect the culture that essentially is intertwined in everything that we do here, whether you like it or not. But it makes their job so hard when they've got to do this all the time. Like another kid doesn't want to come here. Another player doesn't want us to trade for him. Dennis Lindsay went on a podcast last year and said that he had a trade done for a star forward. I know who is Kevin Love. He had a trade done for Kevin Love. And Kevin Love's agent called him and said, don't do this. He will not come live in Salt Lake. He will not report. And so if Austin kind of has this attitude, and again, to your point, conversations certainly took place that we're not privy to. But if he's just going to go all in and be like, look, we're drafting you, we're trading for you, and then, with Ace, they have 7 years, okay? Your rookie contract, 4 years, then you'll pick up the option for the final 3. Unless he wants to be traded. We saw it with Donovan. Gordon left. We do have the PTSD of players that we really latched onto leaving here. But no, if you're Austin Ainge, if you're Danny, if you're Justin Zanuck, if you're Ryan and Ashley, you said, no, we think you're the best player, and we have 7 years to show you that you can accomplish anything you want here in Salt Lake. Just go about it unafraid.
Yeah, and I think they know something about these players that we don't. They know more about their background, their histories, what their other interests are, because these are human beings. They're not commodities.
Right.
Right? And it's not so simple as to say, look at the stat sheet, and look at what we need and let's go for this. I'm sure there was a lot of other input about how his personality, what kind of, he's, by all accounts, everything I could read, he's a super gym rat. Honest to God, he reminded me a lot of Karl Malone. This idea that, like, I got something to prove. And what makes it more, what will feed that more is being in a place that has something to prove, right?
Yeah, good point.
So
well said. Yeah.
I think Kyle Whittingham, which, by the way, there's another guy who's had rumors floated every single year that he's retiring, right? But Kyle Whittingham is bread and butter is getting people to believe that no matter what, no matter who's on the roster, no matter what they're ranked, no one respects them.
Right.
And in sports, that can be a huge, huge, huge bonus.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we'll see. We'll see how it works out. All right, you referenced the Jake Retzlaff story. We'll catch a break, and then we'll do that coming up on the other side. The civil lawsuit has been dismissed, and Jake, according to Pete Thamel, has plans to transfer because he believes he's going to face a 7-game suspension for violating the school's honor code. So we'll get to that with more local storylines as well. Amy Donaldson live in studio for another big segment coming up on the other side right here on ESPN 700. Amy Donaldson is live in studio. Always appreciate Amy's time. World traveler, back on the ground. You been watching any RSL soccer? I know you've been traveling. You've been watching any RSL?
I did. We didn't watch the most recent game, but the game before. And well, I when I got back, like I said, I feel like I was living in another world, especially because rugby is so huge in Australia.
Well, you were there for a month. I mean, that's a long
and they
time.
have this thing, this Origins game, where it's super cool, actually. So all these professional players go back to their club teams. So
Okay.
It's kind of like if all these NFL players went back to their colleges and they had a little tournament.
Oh.
Like an East-West,
Yeah.
versus West, or like they go back to these rivalries. And it's a huge deal. I had to kind of get an education about like who the rugby, like, because my daughter-in-law's family is so, like, you can't cheer for the wrong team.
Oh, okay.
And then, of course, so my daughter and I were in this place called Cairns. She was there for some training. That's when one of the Origin games was. The women's was the day before. We saw part of that, but we went with a bunch of people from the training, a bunch of social workers. We go to this pub and watch rugby, and it was a blast. And, yeah, I love, for me, the cultural aspect. I watched the gold medal game in the 2016 Olympics in Brazil.
Rugby?
Brazil. No, soccer.
Soccer, gotcha.
So Brazil was playing in the gold medal game in the 2016 Olympics in Rio at Macarena Stadium. And I'd been to one of the semi-round games and then a pool game at Macarena with our buddy Chris Camrani.
Very nice.
That was when I was live using Periscope and showing video of my ride, and somebody flashed me.
Oh, that's right.
So that was
that's
cool.
right.
Yeah, it was super cool.
Forgot about that.
Learned my lesson about live video. But I decided on the gold medal night, listen, I want to go, and these people, Brazil, had not won a gold medal in the Olympics in their sport. I mean, in soccer there, the number of leagues, the number of teams, it's just ridiculous. And so I went down. They had this pier. They had these amazing TVs on the edge. I don't know how they were massive. They were like a drive-in movie theater size, 4 of them in different locations. And I just ate Brazilian food and hung out and talked to people and just soaked up the atmosphere. And to me, like, the cultural aspect of sports is as interesting as what's happening in the game.
Sure.
Why did they win? Because I know that's what everyone expects from a sports writer, and so I was tempted to do that. It's so hard to not be there for the gold medal game, but I am so glad I did it. It was really incredible, and especially because these are people who they couldn't afford a ticket, so they're not in the stadium, right? And maybe they've never been inside Macarena Stadium, but they've been to the parties outside, and and so I think it was a little bit of that. I love when I go somewhere to just, even if I don't know the teams, I don't know what's happening. And of course, you get into it, right? Like I got into an argument with a guy about whether or not there should have been a foul. I'm like, oh my God, you're such a homer. It wasn't a foul, you know? So, and again, I keep saying, I'm like, I'm not biased, so my opinion is right. But you know, I covered rugby sevens at the Olympics, and a little bit of rugby here with the Utah Warriors. So I know the game and know the rules, I should say. But so much fun, and everybody plays. I mean, little girls are getting their stuff to go to their footy practices. My little adopted grandson over there, my daughter-in-law's nephew, he's my little grandbaby too now. He's playing soccer on one field with his buddies, and adjacent is these little kids playing rugby. Everybody plays. It's so huge. My daughter has signed up for this is a kid I could not get to play sports. She did cross-country running, and I coached her in softball for 2 years, and she's like, this is not my game. She played little kids soccer. But she's playing in a rugby tournament, you know.
Oh, it's awesome.
So it's just a huge, I did do a CrossFit competition while I was there.
In Australia?
Yeah.
Oh.
So my kid, don't listen, your kids will rope you into stuff.
Would you just
Listen,
dabble in CrossFit?
You're so desperate to be with your children when you're an adult, right?
That's so true.
They say, do you want to take me to lunch? You'll buy
for
lunch
sure
for them because you want to be with them, right? So my kid was like, I want to do this CrossFit thing. We need a third. Do you think you could do it? And I was like, sure. I've been lifting weights, and I do weights twice a week. You know, our old people weights.
Sure.
So she sends me the workout, and I was like, this is going to be hard.
Yeah.
So I put my mind to it for a solid month. I worked really hard. We get there, and what I learn is That's one of the workouts.
Oh, dear.
It's a CrossFit competition. There's a series of workouts.
Yeah.
And that was one. I thought that was the whole thing. In fact, when they said you have to climb a rope and touch the ceiling, I just looked at my husband and was like, what is happening? Where are we?
It's a big ask.
And then I started assessing. I was the oldest by 15 years. And I was like, this is not happening. But I'm telling you, there is something about your competitiveness never goes away. Because they told me what we as a team, we would have had to do these burpees if I didn't do the rope climb.
Oh.
My whole team has to do it.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm not penalizing my team. I did the rope climb.
Oh, girl.
I did it. Yeah. So, but yeah, it was super fun. And now I want to watch more rugby. It was really fun.
Yeah, and your point about the cultural significance of things that are away from the competition, I find to be very applicable for sports like rugby or soccer that I just wasn't raised with, right?
Yeah.
Like when we first brought RSL here in 2004, I've told you, very lukewarm to the whole endeavor. I'm like, what are you doing? Soccer doesn't work I told my father, I'm like, this is a bad idea. You know that. Now, obviously, he was right. I was wrong. And my friends who were soccer fans, still soccer fans, they all said the same thing. You've got to go overseas. You've got to see something in the Premiership. You got to go to Germany. You got to see what it's like over there. And my first eye-opening, oh, wow, okay, soccer means everything to these people was seeing a Tottenham game in London, was seeing a Premiership game. Because I think we have some parallels here. You and I have talked about, like, football is our soccer, football is America's soccer. But, like, I don't even know that does it
baseball.
the proper frame of reference.
I grew up more with baseball. But, and when I was a kid, boxing, my dad was super big into boxing. I mean, I think it's probably whatever you grow up around, right? Like whatever. Yeah. But baseball was the thing, and I do think there's a big. I mean, and then when I went to high school in Alaska, hockey is bigger than football.
Yeah.
I mean, like I can't. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but all the cute girls wanted to be hockey cheerleaders, right? And I was like, why would you want to wear a skirt in a hockey arena?
Right. Yeah.
But we took hockey for PE, like. There was just this culture of toughness, and like 80 below. Well, let's play hockey.
Yeah,
let's go outside.
Yeah,
we need a hat.
Yeah.
I don't need gloves. It was, and there is this whole cultural, watching the gold medal game between the USA and Canada here in Salt Lake.
So cool. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the greatest. That was one of the greatest sports experiences of my life.
Totally agree.
Totally, because I had done I had done the story about the scalpers outside, so I just was my assignment was sit and enjoy the game. So I just watched the game. I did end up writing a feature about Wayne Gretzky.
Okay.
Canada won.
Yeah.
But that was a last minute call from the boss. I was just sitting at center ice, eating my cinnamon covered nuts, thinking like I've died and gone to heaven, because you grow up with this culture of like. We would play hockey on any surface. Like, we would fall down 1,000 times because the ice was so crappy.
Yeah.
But there's this toughness that comes with it. And that was in the women's game, too. It was just so much fun. So, yeah, I love watching sports in other countries and other cultures. And again, the difficulty is understanding what's happening. But being with people, if you understand the game a little bit or even know the rules, there's nothing like it.
No, for sure. And I was actually talking about this with Pablo last week, because Diego Luna, who has been the lone bright spot for this soccer club that just can't figure it out.
Not lone bright spot. I mean, Johnny Russell, when I came back and found out that Johnny Russell had come to RSL, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
But that's one of those things that could be cultural, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then the 2 games, I think I've seen him score twice. He has 2 goals.
He has 2 goals, back-to-back games.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring it up, though,
but Diego, go on with Diego.
It was announced last week, right before Pablo jumped on the show, that Diego was named an All-Star.
Yeah.
For the 2nd straight year, and then you pull up the list. Diego will be playing in that game next to Lionel Messi, and I fully admit that I don't think I have frame of reference for what that means in the ecosystem of who Messi is in the game of soccer or world football.
But imagine being Diego.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's Michael Jordan, it's Tiger Woods, but that might not even do it justice with how big the sport of soccer is worldwide, and most people believe he is the greatest that's ever done it. It's a really cool thing.
Well, and I just saw someone made a TikTok about Diego when he broke his nose.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw this, but he said, like, if this is the mentality of our U.S. men's team, this is America. He said, this is American, you know? And I thought it is that. Like, we love that sort of, you know, as much as we love the, like, lone wolf, you know, rugged individualism type of thing. When it meets that, I won't quit. I could have a broken nose, put a rag up my nose and send me back in the coach game. Like, you know, that idea, I saw people going nuts. And he's like, all these floppers and, you know, fakers and whatever. And then we got this guy.
Yeah,
and I was
yeah.
like, that's actually, like, that is a thing. That's a crossover, because that's one of the reasons people love football so much.
Right.
My dad loved about boxing is you get, as I used to say, losing in football is so painful because it's so painful.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
you don't just lose. You don't just walk off and say that
You're
was
beat up.
humiliating.
Yeah.
You also then feel it
Right.
in every bone and ligament in your body.
Yeah.
For the next week.
Mm-hmm.
But that was I thought that was an I thought, oh, this is that moment I'm looking for, that where Americans see themselves in an international game, or they see themselves in players who are steeped in this international games culture.
Before we move off of RSL, I'm just realizing, because you've been away for so long, that I don't think I've talked to you about the ownership transition. The Millers are now the majority. We may have discussed
we talked
it
a little bit, because I went out to the press conference.
That's right.
We did a little bit.
Well,
I think it's super exciting.
it-
I think I told the Larry Miller stories. Yeah.
That's right. It also appears to be a bit of a paradigm shift. Now, I've had 3 different RSL guests with 3 different messaging, you know, three different messages about this. It was kind of funny because Pablo joined the show, and I always complain when RSL sells great players that they've developed. I'm like, why can't they play for us? I understand the economic value. Andres Gomez, proof of concept, 12, 13 million, you know, goes over to. I get it. But, like, Diego's the guy that I do not want to see go anywhere. He's so bright and he's so young. So Pablo hops on the show and he's like, hey, we're not looking to sell our young players anymore. Jason hopped on the show and he's like, well, that's not entirely true. And then Kurt kind of echoed Jason's sentiment. But it does appear with Steve Starks and the Miller family now running things, there might be a bit of a paradigm shift where if we develop some of these young players through the academy and they turn out to be good players for the senior team, maybe they'll be around here for the long haul. At least that's my hope.
Yeah, I think that paradigm shift you're talking about has something to do with what we talked about at the beginning of this whole thing, and that is they understand how hard it is to convince people this is a great place to be, right?
Yeah.
And so internationally, it's a little bit less of an issue because coming to America is such a culture shock. There's playing in the MLS is so different. But I think there is still, when you're trying to trade for players and when you're trying to get respect, there is still this underdog, you know, nobody wants to play here thing.
Yeah.
And so if you can grow them yourself, and they have loyalty and they have roots here, that is, I think, a thing that the Millers understand maybe better than anybody else.
Well, and talk about proof of concept. I know the Jazz never won a championship under the Miller regime, but they were more often than not really good and really competitive.
We got spoiled.
We did.
Were we going to talk about Jake?
Oh, we're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting there. I'm keeping the
We're
clock.
getting
We
there.
we still got about 10 minutes. I figured we end with that. So let's move over now. We were talking about, you know, football tribalism, and when a story like this surfaces, and let me just say this right off the bat, I've never loved covering honor code violations at BYU. I don't really love discussing it. Like, I just think it's weird societally where people are obsessed with who other people are sleeping with. It's never been like a thing for me.
I look at the honor code as team rules. So, like when a coach talks about somebody being, I mean, it happens in every program. They broke team rules or whatever.
Yeah.
So the honor code is just probably more strict than most team rules and more personal.
Yes.
Right? It feels more personal.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
Those are the things that
So
make us uncomfortable.
So for our listeners' frame of reference, Jake Retzlaff had the civil suit filed a few months ago, and our friends at the Tribune have done a good job with this. And the civil lawsuit was dropped. It has been dismissed, excuse me. Probably a settlement. You know, I think it's okay to say that out loud. I have no idea, but that would be my guess. And then Jake has elected, according to the Tribune, according to Kyle Boniger and Pete Thamel from ESPN, Jake has elected to transfer because he's facing a 7-game suspension. And
all of these things are reports. Nothing is direct from
that
Jake,
is correct.
And nothing is direct from school, because under Tom Holmoe, they used to announce when an honor code violation had occurred and what the punishment was.
Yes.
They wouldn't always tell you what happened.
Right.
You would know his honor code, so we would all be like, oh, something has to do with sex or drinking.
Right.
Right? And then and that's a bad assumption because we don't know.
Sure.
But whatever, so Tom Homo, and I think very wisely said, "Look, this is not necessary. We're going to let you know that there's been a violation of team rules or whatever, and the discipline will stay private."
Yes.
And I think that was a good call. I don't know what I heard and read, and I was reading Jay Drew's stuff from Deseret News as well, and that is that he was telling friends and family a couple days ago that I think Saturday night's when I read it, that he was going to be transferring because he'd had a meeting with coaches and administrators, and they had said, "Hey, you're probably going to have a 7-game suspension."
Mm-hmm.
And I think everyone's question was, and I think one thing that's important to note is that his attorneys responded to the suit, and that response was incredibly detailed, and people were having many feelings about the response and the detail of it and what was alleged and what his defense was. And I think that it is not surprising to me that after that response, which was really brutal, two things happened. He gets told, "You're going to get an honor code violation," and decides to go, and the suit is settled or dropped.
Yeah, and that's where we're at. That's what's happened. It's just, I can remember when these things would kind of either publicly manifest themselves or there'd be rumors of what's happening behind the scenes. A lot of people that do the jobs that we do in media would cry that this thing needs to be changed. BYU needs to change the honor code. It is too punitive. They're not going to do that. Okay.
I don't ever think people shouldn't change their own honor, whatever their rules are.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want you to apply your rules fairly and consistently.
Yes.
That's always been my issue.
Yeah.
I had my only interest ever in the honor code was when it was applied more strictly or more punitively to women than to men.
Yeah.
And that was a problem. But outside of that, what you're signing up for.
100%. 100%.
Think about BYU was Jake's third school.
Right.
So
yeah.
The fact that and that is the way it is now. Was it Walt that had been to 3 schools also?
Two. Walt was in 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I own it in Florida.
And then who's the second round pick?
Tanjay.
Yeah, he's a 4 or 3.
Yeah.
He's a 3 school. So that's sort of the way we're going now. So I don't know who's going to take him. I think it's the timing that's the problem for Jake. But I think that response was, as they say, it was no holds barred. That he was defending himself with everything he could throw at this woman.
Do you think the weight of his response motivated her to try to come together and just get this thing figured out?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because here's the thing. Sexual assault victims don't report crimes because there is, as you said, there's this uncomfortability with reporting on honor code violations that have something to do with premarital sex.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to report a crime that has something to do. It's a crime, but it's also a personal violation that people still see as a purity or a a moral failing that this happened to you, right? And so there's so much tied up in it. There's so much psychologically and emotionally and I'm sure physically that I think it's difficult to deal with a system that wants to deal with facts and evidence. Your body is a crime scene. Think about that, right? That is a difficult thing for me to even fathom. And so that reality was a struggle for her, and she admitted that in her suit. When the response came, and it was allegations about he wasn't the one who did it; it was a different player, and the other player wasn't famous, and wasn't first, wasn't NIL money. The brutality of what you can do to defend yourself in civil court, I think that was probably, it was a painful thing to realize. Now, I'm not saying that she didn't say, "I want to go," and whatever. I don't know any of those details. And I can imagine that reading that was incredibly, whether it's true or not, however you see it, right? And listen, I don't fault Jake's attorneys for doing what they did.
Yeah.
Right? There were people who were critical and talking about how brutal it was and unfair. Look, Jake would make you the same argument. We don't know what he did. We don't know who's telling the truth. So that's what the courts are for. But hashing out something like that is so emotionally painful, and it's going to go on for years.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that if there was a settlement, that was an incredibly persuasive thing because I can't imagine reading that stuff about myself, my loved one, and thinking, I can sustain this kind of fight for years.
No, it's good perspective. One of the reasons I always don't really enjoy covering honor code violations like this is it's a sports talk radio show, so there is a sports angle to it, but it feels like it's so much more heavy. There's so much weight to it as opposed to like, all right, let's debate who the backup quarterback is and who's going to start. Like, no, there are very serious allegations that were alleged, and to your point, we don't know what's true and what isn't. That's not for me to litigate on air. I just try to look at the information and then just try to go from there. But as far as the optics of how this looks for the school, what are your thoughts on that? Because I can remember when Brandon Davies had his suspension in 2011. I mean, that was a basketball team.
That's the one that I remember them changing the policy.
And it's hard to say like they would have won the national championship because the NCAA tournament is ridiculous.
You felt that way. It just felt like.
Well, they were good.
He was so good.
And Jimmer was full Jimmer at the time, and Brandon was a perfect complement to him. And I can remember when that came down, when Brandon was suspended for the NCAA tournament, we had two factions. One faction was, what are we doing here? We have a really good team. And the other faction was, no, this is who we are. Mm-hmm. And so I don't really know where to land with that. I wonder how you feel about the way a story like this with Jake looks for BYU in the athletic department.
I think.
Like, does it dissuade kids from wanting to go play football there?
Well, I mean, it might dissuade some kids, for sure. And it might dissuade some kids from going there and thinking they can get away with it, right? And it might dissuade you from, as a coach, it might dissuade you from recruiting certain types of people, or how. But I think Kalani Sitake is cut from that same cloth. Mm-hmm. This is who they are. They're not changing the honor code. And they're going to embrace the fact that everybody abides by the same rules. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're the superstar. It doesn't matter if it costs us the NCAA championship or an NCAA championship run. It's brutal. It's sad, but it's not any different than a star player pulling up injured, mm-hmm. Right there, and costing a team. Or, and I would say this, that if you embrace the idea that you hold yourself to these standards and you really do it, then I think that becomes a more meaningful thing.
Yeah.
That's all I think.
Yeah.
I feel like if people who have been saying a long time, BYU can't keep competing if they don't play on Sunday. BYU can't keep competing if they have the honor code. They're not getting rid of either one, and they're doing pretty well.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, and now you see teams accommodating their Sunday play. Mm-hmm. You see people respecting the fact that if you follow, all I'm saying is whatever your code of ethics is, just follow it. Because I know programs who have a code of ethics, but they are quick to violate it mm-hmm. if it's their star player.
Yeah.
And nothing will teach you entitlement quicker than having a coach cut you some slack mm-hmm. when they really should sit you on the bench.
Yeah. No, I think it's good perspective. So ultimately, when you look at, to your point, the spot BYU is in as an athletic department, they're in a very healthy spot. Yeah. And I said this, my old producer Brady sent out a tweet because I'd forgotten that I'd said this when I said it, but about 5 years ago when NIL kind of started to become like, wait, this is going to be real. And then it became real about 4 years ago now. I said, if you're a BYU fan, this is excellent news. This is a way that you can, and this was before the Big 12. They were still independent. Now they got the Big 12 invite, which is also even the playing field. But when Utah had their Pac-12 invite and BYU, in a reactionary move, because it was, they don't love it when I say that, went independent, it allowed Utah to evolve past Brigham Young in football in a way that, quite frankly, it never had. I mean, I grew up in the Lavelle years. It was 19-2, I think, over 21 years. And then Coach Mack comes in and kind of evens it up a little bit. But two things. When Kyle said no to his alma mater and yes to Utah, and Utah gets the Pac-12 invite, that sent Utah football kind of on this path where it was a generation of dominance in a way that I never thought was possible. So now we have House v. NCAA, we have NIL, and with those two things combined, it feels like there are a lot of very rich people writing a lot of checks for BYU to add talent right now.
Yeah, I think there were a few other things, and I'm going to give Tom Homo massive credit.
As you should.
Because
did a great job.
I was completely opposed to independence.
Were you?
This is a kiss of death. Because I feel like you need something to play for, especially in football. Like, the minute you're not in the running for a conference title or you're not in the running for, now we have the playoffs, right? there's just less incentive to play
For
a
sure.
combat sport.
For sure.
Especially in combat sports, there's just this idea that what are you playing for? Why are you suffering? Why is this happening? Right? What are you sacrificing for? And so I felt like taking away not just the chance to win those conference titles, but get conference awards. Have those rivalries, like all the stuff that goes with it, the culture, creating this culture. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I don't think they have Notre Dame level culture. Right?
And they don't. No one does.
But but I would say they have their own version of it, whether it's less or not, it's still theirs. But the one thing that Independence allowed Tom Holmoe to do that I think it led to this situation we're in now, including the Big 12 invitation, was he could play during COVID.
Yes.
Everybody else
good point. Yep.
Was subject to conference rules. And the Pac-12 shut down. All those West Coast schools were like, we're not playing. You can't come here. Everything's remote. And Utah suck. And Utah is in a state that politically was very different than the West Coast, right?
Yep.
And so you have your biggest rival, BYU. They're independent.
Yeah.
They can play wherever they want. And that game against Coastal Carolina in the postseason was, I think, such a light, such a moment. I remember just feeling so much joy and thinking, because we're so much, should we be doing this? Should we be playing? And now people are like, we shouldn't. And I remember thinking, like, there's so much grief and loss. Because in sports, especially combat sports, you get a limited amount of time. The average career length for a running back is 4 years.
Yeah.
So every minute does count. And somebody said to me, the reason football's so special is it's, in high school, it's 10 Friday nights. That's it. That's what you get. You might get 82 games in a basketball season, but football is like 15, 16 games now, or 8. I think it's up to 18 now. But like it's just so limited. It's so delicious because it's so rare.
Yep.
And Tom gave us that. He could play because they were independent and they played good opponents and they played well. And I think it was. I remember thinking. I talked to him. I did an interview with him in a story for the Deseret News. But I remember. Talking with him throughout that. And it was a terrifying, stressful, I can't imagine being an AD during COVID, right? But he said, we have to make money. They laid people off during, as everyone did, right? But he was like, we have to figure this out. We have to navigate it. Because they didn't have anybody to rely on. They had this like creative, innovative ability and opportunity that other teams didn't because they were in a conference. The conference dictated what happened.
Yeah, no, well said.
And I think that led to them being seen in a way that maybe they hadn't been seen.
It also helps that they're writing very big checks to attract talent.
No, I think listen. But I think it was like, look at this look how well
100%.
managed they are. Look at these opportunities.
It's a great point that I hadn't considered.
Then you have these people who want to get on board with this. The NIL thing comes out that next year. The settlement takes a couple years, but this is going to be an opportunity. The collective started forming, I think, in 2022, right? Yeah. So I just think that there were just, again, a few alignments, but like I went from like, this is the worst mistake anyone's ever made to being like genius.
Yeah, it worked out.
Also, dominoes fall in your favor too.
Yeah, that happens. That's our time. This is not a podcast. Unfortunately, we do have to break to keep the lights on, Amy. It's always great to see you. We'll see you soon, okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Our friend Amy Donaldson from KSL, we've missed her. It's been too long. ESPN 700 welcomes Maroon 5 to the Delta Center. Coming up on October the 25th. Tickets go on sale on June 27th, so text Maroon right now to 877-353-0700 for a chance to win. Kurt Schmidt joins us coming up on the other side right here on ESPN 700. Well, anybody who thought the Memphis Grizzlies were breaking it all down is not correct. Jaren Jackson Jr., 5 years, $240 million. An extension to stay with Memphis. Free agency in pro basketball began today. The Jazz made a couple of minor transactions we'll tell you about. Let's do a little RSL. The team's been playing better, man. Turning around a little bit. We got 4 points in the past 2 games. We got a really busy July, both on and off the field. And always fun to catch up with our guy, Kurt Schmidt, on a Monday afternoon. Kurt, happy Monday, man. How we doing?
Doing well, Spence. How are you?
I'm well. So do you feel like the past couple of matches you guys have played better, or are things just kind of evening out? You just kind of continue to do what you do, and you're actually getting some better luck, I guess is how I'll put that.
No, I do think we're playing a bit better. The guys are playing with a little more confidence. Yeah, I think it is getting better.
Now, Johnny Russell, Kurt, we've talked a lot about his pedigree in Major League Soccer, and then the story where he just didn't have a club for a minute, and you guys were able to grab him. And every week I check in with Pablo when he joined the show. How's it going? Is he getting fit? Is he getting acclimated? And now we've got a couple of straight games where he's been able to tally a goal. What are you seeing from your one of the acquisitions you made from Sporting KC?
Yeah, I think he just adds a bit of quality and experience to the front line that we didn't really have. We're pretty young in the attack right now, and he's obviously a guy who's been around the block, who knows the league well. He has a bit of calm and poise in those critical moments. His fitness is still coming along, his match fitness. He played a half the one game. He played, I think he got to 60 the second game. So, he's coming along, but obviously he's shown what he has in those critical moments in the attacking third.
I can't imagine what that must feel like. I mean, I'm sure he has a lot of different emotions about Sporting KC because it was home for so long. And also, from what I understand, the end wasn't what he was preferring. But what do you think that was like, man, going up there and scoring in front of those fans where he used to play at such a high level?
I mean, I don't think guys who play at this level ever feel bad about scoring a goal, no matter who they're playing for or who they're playing against. So it was respectful, I think, how he celebrated after the fact, and didn't want to insult the fans there. But yeah, I've never seen a professional at that level be sorry about scoring a goal against anybody. So I'm sure he enjoyed it just fine.
I thought it was a really cool moment. So if we pan back just away from Johnny, and I'll just give you the space, how do you feel like you guys have been able to keep the ship afloat with Diego, with the national team in the attack? Who do you feel like has stepped up?
I think the last couple of games, I think Diogo stepped into the void and added some quality minutes. Obviously, Johnny, with the production the last 2 games, has chipped in and helped us. Obviously Gozo's continued to grow into the role more and more as a young player, and he still needs that calm and poise in the final third. But I mean, the guy works so hard that it's not a question of if that comes, but just when. So I think those guys have stepped up a lot, and Willie and Ari come in up top and giving us some hard work. But yeah, I think all 4 of those guys, or anyone who's played those 4 positions, has actually stepped up and tried to pick up the slack. Since
we brought up Diego, of course, he is with the national team for the Gold Cup experience and continues to be a real bright spot, Kurt. I wonder what your impressions have been as you've watched him play throughout this tournament.
I think he's been fantastic for them, and I think we've talked about this in the past, but he's got something just a little bit different, I think, than the normal cast of characters in the national team has, which is the responsibility to carry the team, to produce and perform for the team, where he knows that everyone's counting on him and there's a little bit more pressure on him, where some guys playing at, some of the top clubs in Europe don't have that as much in their club environment, in their day-to-day environment. And so when you see Diego play for the national team, you see obviously a really good player that has qualities on the ball that will track back and defend, but you see his passion and his energy and his his will to win is something that makes him stand out, I think, head and shoulders above anyone he's playing with now. But even, when he was in the last camp with some of the bigger names, I think he stands out in that group as well.
I honestly do not even know the answer to this question, hence why I'm asking you. But it's never really dawned on me. How connected are you guys to Diego when he's with the national team? Are you calling? Are you checking in? Is Pablo calling? What's that dynamic like when he's away?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. Obviously, he's with them and he's busy, and they're playing, in tournament soccer. They're playing games every few days, so there's not a ton of downtime to just chat with them. I don't know how much Pablo's spoken with them. I've checked in with him a few times, and it seems like he's enjoying the experience.
I do wonder what the hope is as far as, and maybe a lot of this is intangible, because I would imagine just playing on the stage with the national team, getting starts, getting minutes, being able to provide services and provide dangerous chances and scoring chances. I would imagine the intangibles, things like confidence, but Diego doesn't lack confidence at all. I just wonder what sort of, from the club perspective, when your players with the country, what's the hope when he comes back as far as what he's ascertained from the experience?
Yeah, I mean, confidence is a big part of it. Anytime you're playing well, no matter what team you're playing for, no matter what competition it's in, it gives you confidence to carry into the next game, wherever that may be. I think part of it is also as you step up in levels, in the game, whether it's obviously from youth to professional to college, however you want to graduate those levels, speed of play, speed of thought, all that stuff, the space you have shrinks, the speed of play increases. And so, when you're playing with the national team and you're thinking that much faster and you become accustomed to that, and then you come to this level where maybe things aren't quite happening just as fast as they were with the national team, the game slows down for him for a little bit at least, and he can see things a little quicker, and he'll seem like he's playing at a different speed to everyone else maybe sometimes, and it feels that way even as a player when you step down levels and you have a little more time and space to make your decisions.
I certainly have not done the research on this. I'm sure our guy Gerald knows, but I don't recall a midseason month in my history being around this club where you only had 2 matches. I understand there's scheduling stuff with some of the other cups. A lot of cups. Got to keep track of all the cups. What's it like from a front office perspective when you have an entire month with only 2 games? How does that change the way that you go about your business? And did you guys use the space at all to maybe accomplish something you wouldn't have been able to if you were as busy as you're about to be in July?
Yeah, the players had a mandatory break in there as well, so they hopefully got to refresh themselves a bit and get the refocus now on the second half of the season. From our standpoint, I think it was maybe good for us and where we were at. Now, I whenever we don't get the result we want, I always want the next game to be as soon as possible, right? You want to get that taste out of your mouth right away. So coming off of the game in LA, it wasn't ideal maybe to have 2 weeks off, but slowing the pace down a little bit of the season, I think helps us get our legs under us a bit, and obviously put together 2 pretty good performances so far in June. And I hope that we can keep it going this weekend and get another 3 points.
Have you guys, and Pablo dropped some math on us last week as far as, points per game at home, what you need to get over the line that he believes you need to get over to make the postseason. But if I'm looking at this right, it looks like you've got 7 of the next 8 games at home with only a trip to Portland up to Providence Park in between a bunch of home matches. Obviously, Kurt, I know you want to win every game. I'm not going to ask you if you would like to win all of these games. But have you done loose calculations as far as what you need to do home and away to get you close to that point line where you're going to need to be if you want to make the playoffs?
Yeah, look, I think we've got to do what we did in June, right, and maximize our points at home and collect some points on the road when we go there and make sure that we're tough to beat. We're still at a stage where we can do that and get there. And I think the confidence of the group and the optimism within the group is appropriate to that. Now, again, we've got a chunk of games at home, like you said, and it's always there's something psychological about that, right? That's a little bit different on the road, whether it's confidence or comfort or whatever it might be. But the boys know what they need to do here in our home stadium.
All right, so the secondary summer transfer window opens July the 24th. Kurt, just in case you didn't know that, I'm letting you know. So July the 24th. I've never asked you this question before, and maybe there's nothing here. What's the main difference between the primary transfer window and the secondary transfer window? Are there different mechanisms to add to the group, or is it just like, all right, these are just the two windows, and essentially it's the same thing?
I mean, there's no like rules, regulations, I guess that really differ greatly between them. I think the biggest difference for us is given the timing of our season being offset to the European calendar, is the summer window is sometimes the bigger window. There's a larger pool of potential free agents available. There's more teams looking to make broader changes within their squad. So, even for transfer fees, there's more players available and on the market. Teams are a little more able and willing to let guys go at maybe more favorable prices than they are for us in our off season, which is the January window in Europe. And it's the middle of their season, where sometimes it's a little bit harder to pry a guy loose in the middle of a European season. So as it relates to Europe, there's a lot of differences in terms of availability and that's buying as well as selling. The summer window is just a bigger market in Europe. In South America, there's a little bit of that, but it's a lot less impactful as it is in the players coming out of Europe. So that's sort of the big difference.
Are you allowed, again, I honestly just don't know because I'm juxtaposing this to other sports where you're not supposed to talk to players or it's tampering if they're under contract, or you can't make contract offers unless it's in a certain time, or else you could get docked draft picks. During the moments on the calendar, during the stretches on the calendar where neither the primary or secondary window are open, are you allowed to contact players and agents and negotiate?
Yeah, you're allowed to make those approaches and obviously negotiate those deals, and you'll see teams announce deals, before the window opens, and technically that's what we do in the winter window as well, because our window actually, even though we call it the January window, sometimes it doesn't actually open until February. So that's all the signings we make in the off season are signings announced before the window opens typically. So yeah, you're allowed to have those conversations and do those things, and it's largely because the windows are different everywhere. So the relevant window is the window of the league where the player is going. So for us to sign a player, the relevant window is ours. But if we're selling a player, then the relevant window is wherever he's going. So everyone's on different windows and different timelines. So yeah, it's always sort of free moving.
Gotcha. All right. So safe to say you currently are in contact and negotiating with potential additions for the secondary window this summer. Safe to say?
Safe to say, correct.
Okay. What are the priorities? What are we prioritizing? And do you have a loose idea of when we could actually hear announcements of additions on the way?
I do not have a loose idea for you. I'll leave that to Gerald as far as announcements. But no, look, I think we're looking for some help in the attack, but we're also looking to add a little bit of experience to the team. We're a young team, and so adding, obviously we did that with Johnny, but adding another veteran piece I think could help us, help solidify us a little bit. So we're looking to add a little more team speed. So those are sort of three of the things that we're looking to add in this summer window.
Do you feel like you are close to deals? Do you feel like you have targets you have identified and the conversations are progressing where you feel confident that you're going to get a couple across the line?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm cynical or pessimistic, so I won't ever say I feel good until the deal's actually done. But no, we're progressing on a few different fronts, and nothing's signed yet, obviously, but I think we're getting closer and closer.
You do have a new ownership group. I wonder what sort of messaging comes from them to you about how you'll approach this window that's different maybe than past owners that you've worked with.
I mean, again, I don't know if it's different, but obviously they've been very supportive, and honestly, the messaging from them is just, this sounds obvious, right? But be good, win, improve the team. And, there's not, I know there's been a lot of stuff in the marketplace about, selling players and this and that and whatnot. But I think the primary objective, whether it's young players, old players, buying players, selling players, the primary objective is how does this serve the team, to be successful in MLS. And as long as we're serving that objective, then those are the right moves to make. And that's the support that ownership has given us.
It's interesting, Kurt, to consider just the background of the Miller family and their longtime stewardship over the Utah Jazz and the fact that they do come from the world of pro basketball. And I will admit, I mean, when I started learning about soccer and MLS and roster construction and different mechanisms, it's almost like learning a different language. There aren't a ton. I mean, look, talent identification, negotiation, there are evergreen traits to building teams in other sports, but soccer is just a lot different than basketball. I wonder what sort of dynamic that's brought as far as the Millers needing to learn what MLS is, what soccer is, as opposed to, how they have made a name for themselves, and that is owning a pro basketball team and doing it at a very high level for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, look, the numbers are certainly different, smaller often with MLS relative to, some of the other big sports in this country, NBA, obviously, NFL, whatever it might be, MLB. But apart from that, I think one of the biggest thing for someone new to the game to wrap their head around is often just the source of players. Where, in those other sports, your source of players is so domestic, the draft is so important. You can make or break your franchise in 1 or 2 draft years. All the best players in the world are sort of known and in this place. And in MLS, and part of it is because of the way where our league sits in sort of the global hierarchy, but also the popularity and how pervasive the sport is throughout the world. Our pool of players is nearly endless, and the pool of players that can improve our team is vast. And there's no one source. There's no one place to go to get the guy that can solve your problems. You can go here, and if that doesn't work, you can go there, and if that doesn't work, you can go somewhere else. And I think that's something that's a little bit tougher to wrap your head around. Is you got a list of players, and one guy might be from Europe, one guy from South America, one guy might be from Africa, and you're deciding between those three. And obviously it presents some challenges from a scouting standpoint as you're comparing all these different leagues next to each other and how they might translate and what that looks like in MLS. But it also has some advantages because, again, the talent pool that you have to recruit from is pretty vast.
Tell me about St. Louis. I just have the standings pulled up. They're beneath you in the standings, 15 points, 3-11-6, minus 12 goal differential. I know we're supposed to say all these teams are dangerous, Kurt, but it's getting to the point in the season where a team below you on the table rolls into your building. You need to go get all three. So what do they do well? How do you get it done coming up this weekend?
Yeah, all these teams are dangerous, Spence, but not to rehash the cliches, but any team that we play, below us, above us, other conference, doesn't matter. We need to get the 3 points at home. They're below us, but they started out rough, and they've made a coaching change that's given a few guys a new lease on life, who are playing at a different level lately. So it's just, it plays right into your cliche. All these teams are dangerous, and in MLS, the gap from team to team is not as big from just a pure talent standpoint. So a lot comes down to the execution on the day.
Last thing before I set you loose, we had Tony hop on last week. It was really fun to learn about these U16 kids who have set history. They've made history. They became the first club to win Generation Adidas and MLS Next Cup. And look, most of the attention, of course, is on the senior team. That's who people pay to go see. That's who people know. But if you can continue to develop these young players at this level, it will only pay dividends for you down the road. So last thing before I set you loose, provide a little color and context to what this accomplishment means and your thoughts on this academy squad.
I think it's just a testament to the boys and the work they've put in, and obviously the work that the staff has put in, from obviously Tony, Jordan, those guys have done a great job with those teams. The recruitment side, John Spencer, Matt Hayes, those guys have done a great job of bringing the talent in, and just the dedication that all those guys and people that I'm not naming right now. I don't want to go through the whole thing, but that they've put into it. And so I think that they take that very seriously, which is great. And getting talent into the club is really, really important to do what we want to do, which is to be have that focus on development and bringing players through, and making sure that we've got a steady pipeline of young talent coming through. I think when, that's what this club has been before I got here. Justin Glads and Aaron Herrera's and Brooks Lennon's and all these guys, Richie Ledesma's and the Booth brothers, those guys that some guys aren't even here. But there was a gap in the pipeline when I got here. There wasn't, it hadn't been, I guess, stocked appropriately. The recruitment wasn't there when I got here. But I think it was something we focused on a lot right after I got here. That felt like the lowest hanging fruit is to get the right kids into that pipeline early. And now that group is maturing, and actually a lot of that group is now in the 18s and not part of the 16s group. But you see guys like, Gozo and Aiden Hezerkhani that are in that age group that are starting to matriculate into the first team. And with these guys, the U16 group, that's what we expect of them over the next 1, 2, 3 years, is to see which of these guys are going to be the next, the next Gozo, the next Aiden, the next Gavin Beavers, or whatever have you.
All right, my man. Well, I appreciate the time. Congrats on a couple of good results, and go get it done this weekend, all right?
All right, thanks.
All right, Kurt Schmidt, RSL will be back in action. A light schedule for them in June that only included 2 matches. They beat DC United 2-0 and then went up to KC and got a draw 1-1. St. Louis is in town coming up this weekend. Then it will be Houston, a quick roadie to Portland, and then home games against Cincinnati, San Jose. In addition, then it's the Leagues Cup. A lot of cups in the sport. Leagues Cup. Bunch of games at home, though, for RSL. If you didn't get a chance to get out and see him in June, you'll have a lot of opportunities now that July is here. We're about to turn our calendars to July tomorrow. All right, we'll catch a break. There is some breaking NBA free agent news about the Jazz. I feel bad teasing that because it's not that exciting, but I'll tell you what it is coming up next. NBA free agency is officially upon us. A bevy of moves so far. We'll get to that coming up in the 5 o'clock hour of the program on a Monday right here on ESPN 700. All right, let's get it. Drive at 5 time, Monday afternoon style. 6 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. It is a scorching, hot Utah day outside. And as it is, every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts back behind the mic. A little time off. Took Friday off. Good to be back, though, here in our Broadway Media Studios on the day that NBA free agency has begun. We'll give you an update. Jazz made a couple of moves. Nothing all that noteworthy, but we'll get into it. And there's a lot of rumors, man. A lot of rumors about NBA player movement. Draft is behind us. The Knicks look like they might bring in Jordan Clarkson, who the Jazz bought out earlier today. Colin Sexton is a Charlotte Hornet. Yusuf Nurkic, your newest Jazz man. Svi Mikhailuk had his contract picked up. So like I said, nothing all that earth-shattering, but the Jazz are making moves. Austin Ainge putting his fingerprints on this project now that he is the primary decision maker. The 5 o'clock hour of the program today is brought to you by our friends at Outlaw Distilling, a new partner here on ESPN Sports Radio Network. Homegrown, grain-to-glass, nitty-gritty whiskey, vodka, rum, and moonshine distillery right here in Salt Lake County. Outlaw Distillery, Utah grown, with so much history here of cowboys, outlaws, mining, and more. Outlaw has everything on the spirit spectrum, from their spiced rum, vanilla bean rum, outlaw coffee rum, honey bourbon, barrel-proof whiskey, vodka, and moonshine. They have it all. They're embracing the Outlaw name by being rebellious and make some very unique spirits that aren't being seen or created at any other distillery in Utah. Happy to have them on board. If you want to take a sip of their spirits, you can either find their bottles in the local liquor stores or you can book a tasting. Tell them I sent you. The tour is about an hour and a half. You get to keep your shot glass as a souvenir. Get your tour and tasting booked at outlawdistillery.com today. They opened in 2015. Only the fourth distillery in the great state of Utah, deeply rooted in history and tradition. Even the name Outlaw is inspired by legendary characters such as Butch Cassidy and the Outlaw Trail, which served as a primary transportation route for many of the notorious Wild West outlaws. The vision for Outlaw Distillery is clear. Help show the world that some of the best spirits can come from one of the least expected places here in Utah. So, NBA free agency, not a lot of big-time news going on. I don't know why we're debating the LeBron James news outside of he just has to be a story all the time, even when it's not relevant. LeBron has exercised his $52.6 million player option for the Lakers next year. But apparently Rich Paul made a comment like now people are believing he might be traded. The Lakers are not trading LeBron James. And LeBron does not want to be traded. He has Luka Doncic. So I would be stunned, but of course it's LeBron, so we have to just manufacture content to talk about him. Ty Jerome has signed a 3-year, $28 million deal with the Memphis Grizzlies. He leaves the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs made a deal for Lonzo Ball yesterday that became official. Oh, hello. The Denver Nuggets are trading Michael Porter Jr. and an unprotected 2032 first-round pick to Brooklyn for Cam Johnson. Huh. Interesting. That just came down. All right, D'Angelo Russell, 2-year, $13 million deal with the Dallas Mavericks. Trey Jones, 3-year, $24 million deal to return to the Chicago Bulls. So news is coming in fast and furious. A lot of people thought that the Memphis Grizzlies were potentially breaking this thing down after trading Desmond Bane, but they just paid Jaren Jackson Jr. $250 million. So a max extension for Jaren Jackson Jr., Paul Reed, who once upon a time was actually signed as far as an offer sheet for the Utah Jazz, is going back to the Detroit Pistons. The Houston Rockets are not messing around. Of course, they traded for Kevin Durant. Now they have signed Dorian Finney-Smith to a 4-year, $53 million deal. He's exactly what they need. Houston, to this point, I think has to be considered the favorite outside of Oklahoma City to compete in the West. Vegas would agree. The New York Knicks are interviewing Mike Brown for his second time. We'll see if they actually hire a head coach because we still don't know what the deal is. Reports are the Knicks are looking to bring in Russell Westbrook. So Russell Westbrook and Jordan Clarkson on the New York Knicks radar, which is a little bit redundant. Nick Batum is going back to the Clippers on an $11.2 million contract. So it is the first day of NBA free agency. Well, can I kind of continue to keep you in the loop if the Jazz do anything? Well, if they do anything at all, anything kind of noteworthy, we'll have to see how it plays out. The other big local story that we've been talking about today with some of our guests is that the lawsuit accusing BYU quarterback Jake Retzlaff of rape has been dismissed. The civil lawsuit has been dismissed. A lot of people just surmising there was a settlement. That's probably the most likely outcome. So according to what the Salt Lake Tribune and ESPN is reporting, the parties jointly agreed to dismiss with prejudice, ending the case, which was filed last month. None of the parties available for comment, but Jake Retzlaff is going to transfer from BYU after being told that he is facing a 7-game suspension for violating the school's honor code by admitting to premarital sex during the legal proceedings. Sources are telling ESPN he has begun informing staff members and teammates of his desire to leave. McKay Hillstead, the Utah State transfer, Bear Bachmeyer, a couple of options here, but this is a big story. And as I talked about a little bit earlier, I've never been a big fan of covering honor code violation stories. It just feels a little weird to me that we're obsessed with who people are sleeping with. It's just a kind of a weird thing. And then to try to make it into a sports story when there was an allegation of impropriety and sexual misconduct has always been a little bit uncomfortable, but we have to do this in this state because it happens quite a bit. I do always just kind of shake my head whenever anything like this happens. First of all, you don't have to tweet. You don't have to tweet about it. You don't have to have some hot take, some victory lap. There's nothing funny about any of this stuff. I just think it sucks all the way around. I feel horrible for this young lady. I feel bad for Jake. I feel bad for BYU football fans and Kalani and A-Rod. This is a big deal for them. We'll see what the quarterback room will look like with the 3 quarterbacks available. 11-2 last year, Jake was good. There was still the decision-making stuff that at times got loose, the interceptions, just the bad throws out of nowhere. But ultimately, he would have entered, this football season with a lot expected out of him after the year he had last year, where nobody thought BYU was going to be able to do what they did. 11-2, Jake nearly had 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, 12 picks. BYU. I don't know if this changes the landscape of what to expect from them this year. I'll see if the Vegas odds have shifted. BYU and Utah, most of the Big 12 preview stuff that I've read, kind of exist in the same expected stratosphere, kind of like middle of the conference, which is good for a lot of reasons. Amy Donaldson was in studio earlier and talked about the desire of Coach Witt and Kalani at times to play the nobody believes in us card, as opposed to Utah a year ago, who was the overwhelming favorite to win the conference year one of the Big 12. So that's kind of the big local storyline that came down today. A lot of the content today has been NBA free agency, the Jazz making a couple of trades, Austin Ainge beginning his roster construction project as the main decision maker for the Utah Jazz. So a lot of NBA storylines, of course, a little college football as well. RSL's back in action. Coming up on Saturday, they're taking on St. Louis at home. 7 of the 8 next matches for RSL are at home. Diego Luna still away from the club with the Gold Cup stuff. I believe they have the semifinal coming up this weekend. So a lot to do. We will catch a break. Another interesting story came out earlier today. Former Jazzman Malik Beasley is being investigated for it's a federal gambling probe. And Tom Haberstroh wrote a really good piece on this earlier, so we'll bring him in coming up on the other side. Of course, we'll do some Jazz basketball. Ace Bailey, despite reports to the contrary, landed on the ground on time and gave a really nice press conference. Walt Clayton Jr., do not call him Walter. He has decided that he wants to go by Walt. Then, of course, the Tanjay kid. So looks like the Jazz are leaning in and going all in on going young. We'll see what Tommy has to say about it coming up on the other side of a Monday Drive. So keep it right here on ESPN 700. Why are we ending the show? Look, Karen Carpenter has a voice straight from God. I'm not knocking on her, but what? This is such a depressing, sad way to end an otherwise energetic, fun radio show. What are we doing here?
I think my take on sad songs like this, it's a Monday song is the main thing. My take on sad songs like this is they actually make you feel better, right? Because you're singing about rainy days and Mondays.
Okay.
But you're creating some art. So it's there's a lot of sad songs, but they're not necessarily sad on their face. So I don't think so.
It's like a healthy, energetic, artistic expression.
You're getting the sad out by using words and melodies.
All right.
Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I see the logic. It just really is such a sad, depressing song, but maybe we're exercising some demons. I am ready to go home and go to bed. Your boy had a little bit of a aggressively exciting weekend.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I had a buddy's wedding this weekend.
Nice.
I get it. I also had a long weekend.
A lot of golf, a lot of sun, and now it's time for some sleep. I mean, we've been working together long enough. You know, when I do the Portland thing, the flight lands like 20 minutes before the show starts.
I was going to say, you missed crosstalk.
I got here for the very end.
Oh, gotcha.
But we only did like 30 seconds of it because I wasn't sure if I was going to get here by 2. We sat on the tarmac. I was very patient and kind and respectful, as you would expect from somebody like me. Had to wait for the
I love sitting on the tarmac, by the way.
There's nothing worse, dude. There is nothing worse. When you're looking around like, what are we doing here? So had to land, scramble, get to the show. Luckily, pre-agency, the story with Retzlaff and BYU, there's a lot of stuff to get to. What's your take on this stuff down in Provo with Jake and how this kind of has all gone down? I haven't got your thoughts on this today.
I mean, obviously not a fun situation to cover. Like you, it's the last thing in sports that I care to cover in that way, right? Honor code stuff. It takes on a new and different tone, right, when there's assault allegations and the like. So that is obviously first and foremost the focus of the situation, is getting the facts out, getting the specifics out. Now, the funny thing there is we may never know, because what was figured out today, Spence, is that not only has the suit been dropped or dismissed, it was a joint dismissal, right? So Jake and the accuser together filed a dismissal, a joint dismissal, meaning, yeah, as you alluded to, there's probably some sort of settlement behind the scenes in some form. We won't know whatever happened there. So now we move on to the rest of the story, which is an honor code violation, something that doesn't really happen at many other schools anywhere else. They all have team rules. They all have their different coaches who set curfews or the like. It's a little unique there in Provo, and you don't really blame the kid for wanting to find a different situation when you're going to miss half or more of the season ahead of you. I think that you probably got some words of encouragement to maybe look elsewhere as well, and I can also back up some reporting over the weekend that Jake was shopping around to schools that you very much are familiar with. So it's a really, it's an interesting story that's kind of got all of it as far as the Utah sports scene. But at the end of it, I'll just dial into the football. He's going to have to find a new place to play. BYU is going to have to find someone to play quarterback and do so quickly. And hopefully the rest of the people involved in that situation can find some closure and move on with it in hopefully some privacy.
Yeah, I think that's well said. All right, before we say goodnight, the Denver Nuggets are making some moves. Michael Porter Jr., an unprotected 2032 first-round pick. That's always risky. Goes to the Brooklyn Nets. Cam Johnson, who I really like a lot, is now a Denver Nugget. And Denver just brought back Bruce Brown, who played really well for them when they won the championship in 2023. Great off-ball cutter. He's great with Jokic. I like what Denver's done. There's a lot going on. Jazz trade Colin Sexton to Charlotte. They buy out Jordan Clarkson. They guarantee Svi Mikhailuk's contract this year. Going to be a long year for the Jazz, but NBA free agency is always fun. All right, Porter, before we get out of here, what comes our way on a Tuesday edition of the show?
On a Tuesday edition of The Drive, we'll discuss what we just did a little bit more in depth with our friend Kyle Bonagura, of course, off-season football, and the latest on the drama in Provo. Tim McMahon stops by for your NBA Daily Assist, and it's going to be a heavy hoops show from there on out. Smitty in studio for an entire hour, and then the aforementioned Sarah Todd, whose reporting has been on point over the last several days and the last week in Jazz and draft stuff. She joins the show to finish us off on a Tuesday.
Very nice. That'll be a fun Tuesday show. Join us for that. Special thank you today to Tim Bontemps, Tom Haberstroh, Amy Donaldson, and Kurt Schmidt. For any sound you may have missed from the show, website is ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app and take us on the go. The ESPN 700 app is available in the App Store and the Google Play Store. And then finally, for what we do in our space every afternoon for 4 hours, check out our podcast page. It is called The Drive with Spence Checketts. It's available wherever you get your shows. Subscribe, rate, review, say nice things in the comments. Give us all the stars. It helps. For Porter, I'm Spence saying good night. Have a great Monday evening. We'll talk to you on a Tuesday Drive. As always, you can catch it right here on ESPN 700, 92 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN Radio Network.